Hello everyone, I'm the Creeps Cabin. I know you use these videos to fall asleep. So before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. It was late summer when I decided to go camping alone for the weekend. I had done trips with friends before, but this time I wanted to see how it felt to be out in the woods without anyone else around. There was something about the idea of being fully alone that pulled at me, even though deep down I knew it carried risks. The place I chose was about 2 hours out of town, tucked deep into a forest preserve that I'd read about online. It wasn't a marked campsite with running water or fire pits, just an open clearing that hikers occasionally used. I packed up my tent, sleeping bag, food, and a small hatchet, thinking that was all I'd need. By the time I reached the trailhead, the sun was already starting to slide down the sky. The air was warm but heavy, the kind of heat that pressed against your skin and made you sweat even when standing still. The trail leading in was narrow, winding between tall trees that shut out most of the light. My backpack pressed hard against my shoulders as I walked, and the longer I went, the quieter it got. At first there had been the sound of distant traffic, then birdsong, but after about an hour, there was only the sound of my own boots crunching against dirt and leaves. When I reached the clearing, I felt a small rush of relief. The open space was about the size of a football field, surrounded on all sides by thick trees. Grass reached almost to my knees, and there were a few old fire rings left behind by others who had camped here before. I picked a spot close to the tree line, but not so close that branches could fall onto me, and I set up my tent. By the time I had it staked down, the sun was nearly gone, leaving only a thin strip of orange light above the horizon. I started a fire, boiled some water, and made a quick meal. The flames crackled, spitting sparks into the air, and I sat watching them, feeling more tired than I expected. The quiet pressed in heavy around me. I could hear crickets chirping in waves, and every now and then a rustle in the grass or a twig snapping out in the trees. I told myself it was just animals, probably deer, but each sound kept me alert. When you're out there alone, every little noise feels sharper, like it carries weight. By the time I crawled into my tent, the fire was nothing but glowing embers. The night was darker than I had imagined. Without the moon, the sky was a sheet of black, broken only by the faint glow of stars through the thin nylon walls of my tent. I lay there listening, pulling the sleeping bag tight around me, telling myself to relax. Sometime after midnight, I woke up suddenly. At first I didn't know why. I lay perfectly still, my heart thumping in my chest, waiting. Then I heard it. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving through the grass outside. The sound wasn't constant, more like a step or two, then silence, then another step. It wasn't the hurried movement of an animal. It was steady, cautious, human. I held my breath, straining to hear. The footsteps moved closer, brushing through the tall grass, circling near the edge of the clearing. I wanted to believe it was another camper, maybe someone wandering through, but the thought didn't make sense. This wasn't a marked site. There was no reason for someone to be out here in the middle of the night, moving so slowly, not saying a word. I reached quietly for my hatchet, which I had left beside my sleeping bag. My hand closed around the handle, slick with sweat. I didn't move, didn't unzip the tent, just waited. After a while, the sound faded, like whoever it was had gone back into the trees. I stayed awake for hours, listening, every small sound jolting me back to alertness. Eventually, exhaustion dragged me down, and I slipped back into a restless sleep. The next morning, the clearing looked normal again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. When I stepped out of my tent, I noticed the grass around it was flattened in spots, as if someone had walked circles there during the night. My stomach twisted. I told myself it could have been deer, but the pattern was too neat, too deliberate. I packed up my gear quicker than usual, but part of me didn't want to leave. Part of me wanted to believe I was overthinking, that it was just nerves. I decided to stay one more night. I spent the day gathering firewood, walking a little farther into the woods, but never too far from camp. The deeper I went, the more uneasy I felt. At one point, I found an old tree with deep scratches carved into its bark, high up where no small animal could have reached. They looked too wide to be from a knife, and too intentional to be random. I stared at them for a long time before backing away. By evening, I had a fire going again. The air was cooler, and the night came quicker than I expected. As the sky darkened, The forest around me seemed to grow heavier, each shadow stretching longer, the silence louder. I ate, stared into the flames, and tried to ignore the feeling that I wasn't alone. When I finally went into the tent, I kept the hatchet beside me again. I lay awake, listening, waiting. Hours passed. Then, just like the night before, I heard it. The same slow, deliberate steps. This time closer. The sound of grass bending under weight, twigs cracking softly. My throat went dry. The steps circled the clearing, moving in and out of range, like someone pacing, watching. Then I heard breathing. Low, steady, just outside the thin wall of my tent. My skin went cold. I tightened my grip on the hatchet and forced myself not to move. The breathing stayed for a long time, then faded again, footsteps trailing back into the woods. I didn't sleep. I waited for morning, counting the hours, feeling every muscle ache from staying so tense. When the first light finally broke through, I crawled out and scanned the clearing. The grass was pressed down in clear tracks leading straight to my tent, and then away again, back into the trees. That was it for me. I packed everything up, shoving it into my backpack without care. I didn't eat, didn't bother putting out the ashes of my fire properly. I just needed to leave. My shoulders ached as I hauled the pack on, but adrenaline pushed me forward. The trail felt different in the daylight, but I couldn't shake the sense of eyes on me. Every time the wind shifted through the leaves, I thought I heard footsteps behind me. Every bird call sounded sharp, like an alarm. About halfway back to the car, I found something that froze me in place. On the ground, just off the trail, was a cigarette butt, fresh enough that it hadn't been there long. The forest had been empty when I arrived, and I hadn't seen anyone else the entire time. Whoever had been out there had been close, maybe following. I didn't touch it. I just stared for a moment before moving again, faster this time, my heart pounding in my chest. When I finally reached the parking lot, my car was the only one there, just like when I had arrived. I tossed my pack into the trunk, got in, and locked the doors before even starting the engine. My hands were shaking as I gripped the wheel. Driving away, I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see someone step out of the trees and watch me go. But there was nothing, just empty forest fading behind me. Even now, I don't know who it was or what they wanted. Maybe it was someone living out there, maybe just a stranger passing through. But the way they moved, circling, waiting, breathing outside my tent, it wasn't random. They knew I was there, and they wanted me to know they were too. I never went back to that place. Every time I think about camping alone, I remember the sound of footsteps in the grass, the breathing just outside the thin wall of my tent, and the cigarette but left on the trail. It reminds me that being alone in the woods doesn't always mean you're truly alone. Sometimes someone is out there, watching, waiting, and you might not even realize how close they are until it's too late. I remember the feeling of cold sweat sticking to my back, even though the air outside was warm that evening. The sky was clear, the kind of summer evening that feels harmless, almost comforting, with the last bit of sunlight fading behind the trees. I had decided to take a walk, something I did often when my head felt crowded. The road near my house cut through open fields and patches of woodland, quiet enough that you could hear crickets buzzing before night even settled in. I didn't think much about the fact that I was going alone, or that the daylight was slipping away quicker than I expected. I started along the road with my hands in my pockets, noticing the way the tall grass leaned into the wind and the smell of dry dirt rising from the ground. Every now and then a car would pass, but as I went further out, the traffic thinned until it was just me and the fading orange glow in the sky. I had gone this way plenty of times, so I wasn't uneasy yet, just wrapped in the rhythm of my footsteps and the thought of how far I'd go before turning back. By the time I reached the old split in the road, the sun was already slipping below the tree-line. The left path led back toward the main road, the one I usually took when I wanted to stay in familiar territory. The right path narrowed into gravel, leading deeper into the woods. I don't know what made me turn right. Maybe I was restless. Maybe I thought I'd cut through and come out near the other side faster. At the time, it felt like a harmless choice. The gravel crunched under my shoes, louder than I expected in the still air. The trees pressed in quickly on both sides, tall trunks crowding close together with their branches blocking out the last scraps of daylight. Within minutes, the orange glow was gone, replaced by that heavy, dull shade that comes just before true dark. I kept walking, trying to memorize the bends in the path. I had no flashlight with me, only the weak glow of my phone if I needed it, but I told myself I wouldn't. It was supposed to be just a walk. I noticed the air grew cooler as I went further, and the sound of insects wasn't as strong in the deeper woods. The silence pressed closer, broken only by the crunch of my steps. Then I heard something else. It wasn't loud at first, just faint enough to make me stop and hold my breath. Leaves shifting, branches snapping, not the sound of a squirrel or a rabbit. Heavier. I stood still for a long moment, staring into the dark between the trees. Nothing moved, nothing showed itself, so I told myself it was just the woods adjusting to the night, maybe a deer moving somewhere off the trail. I kept walking, but my steps were slower, more careful now. My ears strained for every sound. The path bent left and narrowed even more. The trees looked thicker here, leaning toward each other, as though trying to cover the road completely. My stomach tightened when I realized how quickly the light had gone. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. Past 9. The screen lit up my face for a second, harsh and artificial against the dark, before I shut it off and slipped it back in my pocket. That's when I heard it again, only closer. Heavy steps, the crunch of leaves pressed down by weight. This time I froze, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. I turned slowly, staring down the path behind me. It was empty, but the sound had been clear, not my imagination. The silence afterward was worse, as if the woods were holding their breath too. I forced myself to keep moving. My walk had turned into something else now, no longer peaceful, no longer meant to clear my head. Every step felt like it echoed. My throat was dry, my palms sweaty. I kept glancing over my shoulder, catching nothing but the black shapes of trees melting into each other. My mind wanted to race ahead with thoughts I tried to push down. I didn't want to believe anyone was back there, following me. I didn't want to think about what else it could be. The path sloped downward into a dip where the air felt damper, colder. That's where I smelled it. Something sharp, almost metallic, like rust or blood carried faintly on the breeze. I stopped again, sucking the air through my teeth, straining to place it. It was faint, but it didn't belong. I didn't want to linger long enough to figure out where it came from. When I started forward again, I heard it without question this time. Footsteps, steady and deliberate, behind me. I turned fast, phone in hand, screen lighting up a weak circle. Nothing. Just the trees, their bark peeling and pale in the glow. The sound stopped the moment I stopped. I stood there shaking, arm raised, waiting to see movement in the shadows. I spun back and walked faster, almost a jog now, gravel scattering under my feet. My breath was quick, shallow, and loud in my ears. The trees pressed tighter, the air thicker. Every time I picked up speed, I swore I heard the same rhythm following, matching, just out of sight. Not running, not stumbling, steady, as though whoever or whatever it was didn't need to rush. At one point the path forked again, but I didn't remember it from before. Both directions looked the same, dark, narrow, endless. My chest tightened with panic. I stood there for too long, trying to decide, when I heard it again, closer this time. I took the left without thinking, feet pounding on the gravel. The left trail felt less like a road and more like a game trail, weaving tighter between trees. Branches scraped my arms and caught on my shirt. My legs burned as I forced myself to keep going, not daring to look back now. I could hear it still, faint but certain, something moving behind me at the same speed I moved. Always matching, never retreating. I started to notice landmarks now, desperate for something familiar. A fallen log, half rotted and split open. A rock jutting out of the ground. None of it helped me know where I was. The woods seemed endless, twisting on themselves. My lungs hurt, my throat raw. I slowed, stumbling, when I noticed something ahead, an opening. The trees thinned suddenly, and I stepped out into a clearing. The ground leveled into short grass, the moon just high enough to cast pale light across the space. Relief hit me for only a second before the silence of the clearing felt worse than the woods. I stopped in the center, bent over, hands on my knees, gasping for breath. My ears strained. Nothing. The footsteps were gone. I stayed like that, staring at the tree line, waiting for something to move, waiting for a shadow to break off and come toward me. My heart hammered so hard I thought I would pass out. The longer I stood there, the more I felt watched. Not from one place, but from every direction. I could feel it pressing in, thick and heavy. I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to pick a side of the clearing and hope it led me out. My body felt like it moved on its own, stumbling forward, eyes scanning for any sign of a road, a light, anything. That's when I saw it. Off to the right, half hidden by trees, a shape that looked like a fence post. I moved toward it, then saw the faint outline of wire strung between posts. My chest loosened a little. A fence meant property. Property meant people. I followed the fence line, brushing against rough wire, ignoring the way it scratched my arm. After what felt like forever, I saw a break, an old wooden gate, half hanging, crooked on its hinges. I slipped through, the sound of it creaking behind me making my skin crawl. On the other side was another path, this one wider, packed dirt with tire tracks pressed into it. I followed it as fast as my legs could carry me. My legs ached, my knees weak, but I didn't stop. My head whipped around at every sound, every shift of leaves, but the woods behind me stayed silent. It wasn't until I saw the glow of a porch light in the distance that I finally let myself breathe. A small farmhouse sat up on a rise, its light cutting across the road. I don't remember crossing the last stretch, only the way the gravel cut into my shoes as I nearly ran to reach it. The sound of a dog barking from somewhere in the yard was the first normal thing I had heard in what felt like hours. I stopped under the porch light, bent over, hands trembling, sweat dripping down my face. I didn't knock, didn't go to the door. I just stood there in the light, refusing to step back into the dark. My chest rose and fell, air burning in my lungs. For the first time all night, the silence didn't feel like it was pressing in. It felt like safety. I never found out what was in those woods. I never figured out if someone was following me or if my fear had twisted sounds into something else. All I knew was the steady rhythm of those footsteps, always matching mine, always close but never seen. Even now, years later, I can still hear that sound in my head, the way it stopped every time I stopped, the way it returned when I moved again. That night I walked home along the main road under the pale glow of the porch light until I saw the distant glow of street lamps, refusing to let the dark swallow me again. I never took that right-hand path again. Even now, I never walk without a flashlight, and I never ignore the feeling of being followed. Because the silence of the woods isn't empty. It remembers and it waits. And if you're not careful, it follows. I never liked driving late at night, but sometimes I didn't have a choice. That night I had been working late and didn't leave until after midnight. The road home stretched for miles through empty farmland, the kind of place where there are no streetlights, no other cars, nothing but the thin white lines of the pavement and the shadows of trees reaching across from both sides. The night felt heavier than usual, darker than usual, and the silence inside my car seemed to grow louder the further I drove. I could hear every small noise, from the soft hum of the tires to the ticking sound when I touched the indicator, and it felt like even the smallest sound echoed in that endless space. The road was so quiet that I started noticing every detail more than I usually did. The dashboard lights glowed faintly, throwing a pale green on my hands gripping the wheel. My headlights stretched ahead, cutting a narrow path into the dark, but everything outside that beam was pure black. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, and every time it was just as empty as before. Still, I found myself checking it again and again, almost expecting something to show up behind me. The only other lights came from the red glow of my taillights, bouncing faintly against the road behind me whenever I looked back. I had about an hour of driving left, and already my body was feeling heavy from exhaustion. My eyes burned a little, and I had to blink often to keep them sharp. I rolled the window down for a moment to let the cold air hit me, and it worked for a while. The smell of fields and damp dirt drifted into the car, reminding me how far I was from anything. No houses, no gas stations, no sign of life at all, just miles of empty road and black fields. About halfway through the drive, I saw something up ahead on the road. At first it looked like nothing, just a shape lying in the center of the lane. But as I got closer, I realized it was an animal. A deer, stretched out on its side, completely still. I slowed down and moved around it, the beam of my headlights brushing over its lifeless body for just a moment. Its eyes reflected the light, bright and glassy, and then were gone as I passed. I felt a chill creep into me, even though I knew deer often got hit by cars around these roads. Still, there was something unsettling about how still it was, how it seemed to have been left there in the middle of nowhere, like no one would ever come for it. I tried to shake it off and kept driving, but a strange feeling stuck with me. The road seemed emptier than before, and I couldn't help but keep glancing at the mirrors again. My ears picked up every sound in the car. The hum of the tires almost seemed to grow louder, vibrating through the floor. My fingers were tight on the steering wheel without me realizing it. I told myself it was just the tiredness making me uneasy, but that didn't help much. A few miles later, I thought I saw movement at the edge of my headlights. Something darted across the road too quickly for me to get a clear look. My foot slammed on the brakes without me even thinking. The car skidded slightly before coming to a stop. I sat there breathing hard, staring out at the empty road ahead. Nothing was there. I leaned forward, squinting into the dark, but the road was clear. My heart was hammering in my chest, and I sat there for what felt like a full minute before finally pressing the gas again. The car crawled forward slowly until I felt safe enough to push it back up to speed. The longer I drove, the stranger it felt. The night wasn't just quiet anymore. It was oppressively silent, like everything around me was holding its breath. I couldn't even see stars overhead, just thick clouds covering the sky. The beam of my headlights seemed smaller, as though the darkness was swallowing them up. Every part of me wanted to reach the end of that road as fast as I could, but it also felt like no matter how far I went, the road was stretching longer than it should. I tried to distract myself by focusing on the small details inside the car. The faint scratches on the steering wheel, the way the fabric of the seat pressed against my legs, the slow rise and fall of the fuel gauge needle. But each time my eyes drifted back to the road, the unease hit me all over again. My body was tense, shoulders tight, jaw clenched, and the air inside the car felt warmer than it should, even though the window was cracked open. Then I noticed something strange. When I looked into the rearview mirror, for just a split second, I thought I saw headlights in the distance behind me. Two small dots of light, faint but there. Relief washed over me for a moment. I wasn't alone on the road. But when I looked again, the lights were gone. The road was just as black and empty as before. I kept glancing back every few seconds, convinced I would see them again, but there was nothing. I told myself maybe it had been my eyes playing tricks or a reflection from something, but the unease deepened. My body wouldn't relax no matter how much I tried. Minutes passed like hours. Every bend in the road felt the same. Every tree at the edge of the headlights looked identical. It started to feel like I wasn't getting any closer to home at all, just stuck in an endless loop of the same stretch of road. My grip on the wheel tightened even more, and I had to keep rolling my shoulders to shake out the stiffness. My breath sounded loud in the small space of the car, and the back of my neck prickled as if I was being watched. I tried not to look in the mirrors anymore, but my eyes kept drifting there on their own. That same black nothing stared back at me every time. My brain started to fill in shapes that weren't there. For a second I thought I saw a shadow move in the back seat reflection, but when I twisted around, the seats were empty. My stomach dropped all the same, and I forced myself to keep my eyes forward, not trusting the mirror anymore. The miles dragged on until finally I saw something up ahead that broke the monotony. A car pulled off to the side of the road with its hazard lights blinking. Relief hit me at first, proof that I wasn't alone, but it quickly turned into hesitation. The car looked out of place. It was angled oddly, not parked properly, almost as if it had been abandoned in a hurry. The blinking orange lights threw a strange glow on the ground around it, and as I slowed down I saw that the driver's door was wide open. No one was inside, no movement around it at all. I passed it slowly, my eyes straining to catch every detail. The car looked fairly new, clean, but something about it felt wrong. The hazard lights kept flashing rhythmically, and the open door gaped like a mouth. The fields around it were empty, but I couldn't shake the thought that someone was hiding just out of sight, waiting. My foot pressed harder on the gas as I passed, and I didn't look back in the mirror. I didn't want to see if something was there. The last stretch of the drive felt like a blur of fear and exhaustion mixing together. My heart never fully slowed down, and every little sound made me jump. The deer, the strange flash of headlights, the abandoned car, they all piled up in my head until I felt like I was being herded forward by something unseen, pushed faster and faster down that endless strip of asphalt. When I finally reached the first faint glow of lights from the outskirts of town, the relief hit me so hard I almost laughed. The sight of a gas station sign in the distance felt unreal after all those miles of darkness. As I pulled into town, the road slowly came alive with streetlights and the occasional car. The world felt normal again, noise and light and people around me. I could breathe easier, but my body stayed tense, and the back of my mind wouldn't let go of the night behind me. Even when I pulled into my driveway and shut off the car, the silence felt heavy again. The house was dark and quiet, but at least it was home. I carried myself inside quickly, locked the door, and stood there in the hallway for a long time listening. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of a clock on the wall, the creak of the floor beneath my feet. It all grounded me, but it didn't erase the road behind me. That long, empty stretch of blacktop, the lifeless deer, the flicker of headlights that weren't there, the car with its door open in the middle of nowhere. I knew I'd have to drive it again someday, but the thought of that road stayed with me long after the night ended, pressing on me whenever I remembered just how alone I had really been out there. I never thought a simple trip out into the woods would change the way I looked at being outside at night. I always enjoyed being away from the noise of town, away from the sound of cars, people, and lights. The forest had always felt like a kind of escape, where I could walk and hear only the crunch of leaves under my boots, the snap of small branches, and the rustle of wind through the trees. But that one night, everything I liked about it was replaced by a kind of heaviness I couldn't shake, and every detail burned into my memory in a way that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. It started with what was supposed to be a short solo hike that I had planned to stretch into a night of camping. I picked a spot that was far from any official campground, tucked away off an old logging road that hadn't been used for years. I parked my car at the end of the road, slung my pack over my shoulders, and started walking deeper into the woods. The late afternoon sun filtered through the trees, painting the ground in broken strips of gold and shadow. My pack felt heavy at first, but I adjusted to it quickly, finding a rhythm with each step as I followed the faint line of a deer trail. The smell of pine needles mixed with damp soil, and the air felt cool but clean in my lungs. After about an hour, I came across a small clearing that looked perfect. The ground was flat, surrounded by tall trees on 3 sides and a ridge on the 4th. It felt sheltered but not claustrophobic. I dropped my pack, set up my tent, and gathered a pile of firewood from the fallen branches nearby. The process of setting camp always felt grounding to me, hammering in stakes, tightening guy lines, arranging my gear. When the tent stood solid and the firewood was stacked, I sat on a log, lit a small fire, and let the quiet settle in around me. By the time the fire had burned into a steady glow, the sun had nearly disappeared behind the ridge. The forest grew darker by the minute, the spaces between trees turning into solid walls of black. The fire's crackle and occasional pop felt louder against the silence, and every now and then I'd hear the call of a night bird or the distant snap of something moving through the underbrush. I told myself it was just deer or raccoons. That's what it usually was out here. I ate a simple meal, just some noodles boiled in my camp pot, and sat staring into the flames as the night deepened. The sky above the ridge faded from purple to a deep blue, and stars began to appear in patches through the tree canopy. I leaned back against my pack and listened to the sounds of the night. It felt peaceful, but under that peace, I noticed a tension in my chest that I couldn't explain. I kept glancing toward the tree line, my eyes trying to pierce the dark, as if expecting to see something standing there. Nothing ever was, but the feeling stayed. Eventually, I left the fire burning low and grabbed a small flashlight to collect a bit more firewood. I didn't want to run out later in the night, and the thought of sitting in complete dark with just the tent fabric between me and the outside didn't sit well. I walked a short way into the trees, the flashlight beam cutting across trunks and branches, the light bouncing with each step. The air was colder under the cover of the trees, and I noticed the way the beam caught the fog of my breath. I bent down, gathering dry sticks and pieces of wood, stacking them in my arms until I had a decent load. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was just my breathing echoing strangely in my ears, but it wasn't. Behind me, not more than 20 or 30 feet away, came the sound of heavy breathing. Slow, deep, and rough, like the sound of someone catching their breath after running. The hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up. My flashlight shook slightly in my hand as I turned, but the beam only revealed tree trunks and the tangled brush between them. I stood frozen for a moment, listening. The breathing continued for several seconds, then began to move, shifting left, fading but still there, as if something was walking away slowly. The crunch of leaves underfoot followed it, faint but steady. My chest tightened. I strained my eyes, trying to catch any sign of movement, but all I could see was darkness layered between the trees. I forced myself to move, walking quickly but carefully back toward my camp, the pile of sticks pressed hard against my chest. Every step I took, I expected to hear the breathing behind me again, closer this time. But the forest stayed quiet except for the sound of my own boots and my own breaths, quick and shallow. When I finally broke back into the clearing, the sight of the faint orange glow from my fire felt like a lifeline. I dropped the wood, almost stumbling as I crouched beside the fire, feeding sticks into it until the flames rose higher. I sat there, staring out at the tree line, my pulse pounding in my ears. It could have been an animal, I told myself, though the sound of its slow, deliberate breathing didn't match with any animal I'd ever heard out here. Coyotes yipped, deer snorted, bears huffed, but this had sounded human. The rest of the night stretched long and heavy. I kept the fire burning brighter than I usually would, tossing wood on every time it began to dim. I sat upright, eyes fixed on the trees, listening for any sound. Hours crawled by. At one point, I thought I heard something faint, a crack of a branch somewhere in the distance, but it didn't come closer. I tried to tell myself it was just my nerves, but the tension never eased. When morning finally came, the sky lightening to gray, I felt relief wash through me, but it was mixed with exhaustion. I stepped out of the tent, stretching stiff muscles, and looked around the clearing. Everything looked normal, the trees still, the ground littered with pine needles and twigs. But when I walked to the edge of the tree line, I noticed something in the soft dirt just inside the shadow of the trees. Prints. Not the hoof marks of deer or the paw prints of coyotes. These were the clear outlines of boots, pressed into the earth, leading from one side of the clearing into the woods. I stood staring at them for a long time, my stomach sinking. The tracks weren't mine. I had entered the woods from a different direction, and I hadn't walked this way at all. The prints were fresh, edges sharp in the morning light. I followed them a short way into the trees, but they quickly blended with the forest floor where leaves covered the ground. I turned back, unease tightening in my chest again. I packed up my camp quickly after that, stuffing everything into my pack without the usual care. My eyes flicked constantly to the trees around me, half expecting to see someone standing there watching. When I finally hoisted the pack and started back down the deer trail toward the logging road, I walked fast, not stopping to rest, not looking behind me. The silence of the forest pressed in with each step, and every sound seemed sharper. The flap of a bird's wings, the rustle of brush, the creak of trees swaying. When I reached my car, I tossed the pack into the back and climbed in, locking the doors as soon as I was inside. I sat gripping the steering wheel, breathing hard, scanning the tree line one last time. Nothing moved, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there. Something that had stood close enough to watch me by the fire, close enough to breathe heavy in the dark. Driving away, the forest thinned, the road winding back toward town, but the weight of that night stayed with me. The sound of those breaths behind me, the tracks in the dirt, the feeling of eyes in the trees, those weren't things I could explain away. It hadn't been my imagination. Someone had been there. Someone had walked into those woods and stood near my camp in the dark, close enough for me to hear the air pulling in and out of their lungs. And that thought alone is what unsettled me more than anything. Out there, miles from anyone, no lights, no noise, no help, someone else had been watching me. Not an animal, not some trick of the forest, but a person. And the truth is, I'll never know who they were or what they wanted because they never showed themselves. They just watched, hidden in the dark, until the morning came. That was the last time I camped alone deep in the woods. Even now, when I think about going back, I picture those prints, fresh in the dirt, and I hear that slow, steady breathing behind me in the dark, and I know I don't want to ever hear it again. It started as a simple idea to get away for a while, nothing more than a weekend trip out in the woods. I had been working long hours, barely sleeping, and I thought some time out in nature would help me clear my head. I packed my tent, a small camping stove, and enough food to last me 2 days. The weather looked good, no rain in the forecast, just cool nights and mild days. I chose a place I had never been before, a stretch of forest and hills about 3 hours from home. It wasn't a marked campsite, just a field on the edge of the woods that I found by tracing dirt roads on the map. That appealed to me. No crowds, no people wandering nearby. Just quiet. The drive out was long, the kind where you lose cell service and notice how the road gets narrower, more broken, with patches of gravel that make the car rattle. By the time I reached the field, the sun was leaning low in the sky. The field was flat and open, tall grass rippling in the evening wind, bordered by dense trees that stood like a dark wall. Beyond that, hills rose, their ridges sharp against the fading light. I parked the car near a break in the grass and carried my gear toward the center of the field. Setting up camp felt easy. I staked down the tent, arranged my sleeping bag, and lit a small fire with dry sticks I found scattered near the edge of the trees. As the last light disappeared behind the hills, the sky faded to a deep blue, then to black. The fire was the only warm glow around me. I sat on a folding chair, ate a quick dinner, and felt myself relax in the quiet. Crickets chirped, and every now and then a breeze rustled through the grass. At around 9 o'clock, I noticed movement on the ridge. The fire had burned down low, and I was leaning back, staring at the hills without much thought. That was when I saw a shape against the night sky. A person. I froze, staring at the figure as it walked along the ridge, not hurrying, just moving straight across from one end to the other. It didn't pause, didn't look down into the field, just continued at a steady pace until it vanished over the far side of the hill. The sight unsettled me. It was late, too late for someone to be hiking out there, especially alone. The ridge was far, maybe 200 feet away, but seeing someone up there at night gave me a strange feeling, like I was being watched even though they hadn't stopped. I told myself it didn't matter. Maybe it was just a hunter heading back. Maybe a farmer checking land. I put more wood on the fire and tried to shake off the unease. Later, when the fire burned lower again, I went into the woods with a flashlight to collect more sticks. The trees closed around me, the ground soft with fallen leaves and branches. My light bounced from trunk to trunk, and I kept telling myself to hurry, to just grab what I needed and get back. That was when I heard it, a sound behind me, heavy breathing. I stopped moving, the flashlight shaking in my hand. The sound was close, too close, like someone standing only a few feet back. My heart pounded in my chest. I swung the light behind me, but nothing was there, only the narrow gaps between the trees, the bark pale in the beam. But I knew I had heard it. Not the sound of wind or animal movement, but the slow, labored rhythm of someone's breath. I crouched, grabbing whatever sticks were near, my hands trembling. The breathing started again, but this time it was moving, drifting away through the trees. I turned the light and caught the faintest suggestion of movement, a shadow slipping between trunks. No clear figure, just the way something passed through, breaking the pattern of the woods. The sound grew fainter, until finally it was gone. I didn't wait. I ran back to the field, the firelight ahead of me like safety itself. My chest ached, my legs shook, and when I reached the tent I dropped the sticks without caring how many I had gathered. I stood there for a long time, staring at the dark wall of trees. I wanted to believe it was an animal. A deer. A bear. Something natural. But the way it moved, the way it sounded, it hadn't felt like that. The night dragged on. I fed the fire just to keep the light steady. Every crack of a branch in the woods made me flinch. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, watching, waiting. I barely slept, drifting off only to jolt awake at the smallest sound. When the first light of morning touched the field, I felt relief. The forest looked less threatening in daylight, just ordinary trees and brush. I forced myself to eat breakfast to calm down, telling myself I had overreacted. Lack of sleep, nerves, imagination. The ridge was empty now, the woods silent. I considered packing up and leaving right then, but part of me refused to give in. I had come all this way to spend a weekend out here. If I left after one night, I'd feel weak, embarrassed. I decided to stay. The day passed slowly. I explored the edge of the forest, keeping my walks short, and sat in the field reading a book I had brought. Nothing happened. It felt calm again, almost normal. By afternoon, I began to believe I had worked myself up for nothing the night before. But as evening fell, my nerves returned. The sun slipped behind the ridge, and shadows stretched long across the field. I couldn't stop myself from looking up at the hill again, searching for movement. At first, nothing. Then, as the sky deepened to blue, I saw it again. A figure. The same steady walk, following the ridge, as if on a path only it knew. This time I felt no doubt. Someone was out there. Someone had been watching me since the first night. I kept the fire high, feeding it constantly as darkness fell. The woods loomed closer in the firelight, their edges sharp. I stayed awake again, my nerves frayed, my eyes heavy but refusing to close. Hours crawled by, the silence broken only by the crackle of fire and the occasional rustle in the grass. At some point in the night, I heard movement again. Not breathing this time. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, moving through the grass at the edge of the field. I turned my flashlight, but the beam reached only so far. I caught nothing but swaying blades of grass. The footsteps stopped, then started again, circling, always just outside the reach of my light. I gripped a heavy stick from the firewood pile, my hands slick with sweat. My chest was tight, every muscle ready to bolt. But the steps never came closer. They lingered, circling, testing, then fading away into the dark. By the time morning came, I had made my decision. I wasn't staying another night. I packed my gear quickly, barely touching my breakfast. The field looked harmless in the daylight, but I couldn't forget the figure on the ridge, the breathing in the woods, the footsteps circling my camp. I loaded the car, glancing constantly at the trees, at the hill. Nothing moved now. The silence was heavy, like the place was holding its breath. I drove away fast, not looking back until the field was out of sight. Even now, I can still picture that figure against the night sky, walking the ridge without pause. I can still hear the sound of breathing just behind me in the woods, the deliberate crunch of footsteps circling in the dark. I'll never know who it was or what they wanted. But I know one thing clearly. I wasn't alone out there. And whoever was out there made sure I knew it. The memory stays with me, sharper than it should, as if I left part of myself in that field. I've camped since then, but never alone, never again in a place without other people nearby. The silence of the woods no longer feels peaceful to me. It feels like something waiting, something patient, something that can follow without ever being seen. It was supposed to be a simple night outdoors. I had been needing a break from everything and decided that camping alone in the woods would be the best way to clear my head. I drove out far from town, down a rough dirt road that narrowed with every mile. The air grew colder as the sun sank lower, and by the time I parked at the small pull-off spot near a field, I could already feel the silence pressing in. There were no other cars, no lights, nothing to suggest anyone else was around. Just me, the field, and the forest that bordered it like a black wall. I hauled my pack out of the trunk and set up camp at the edge of the field. The grass was tall in places, brushing against my legs as I moved. The ground was uneven, but I managed to pitch my small tent close to the tree-line. The air smelled damp, heavy with the scent of dirt and leaves. As I gathered wood for a fire, I noticed how quickly the daylight was vanishing. Shadows stretched across the field, long and thin, before dissolving into the thick darkness of the forest. By the time I got a fire going, night had settled in fully. The flames threw sharp orange light around me, and beyond that circle was nothing but pitch black. I cooked a small meal, sat by the fire, and listened to the sounds of the night. At first, it was calming, the occasional chirp of insects, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. But soon, I realized just how deep the quiet ran. The noises came in faint bursts, far apart, leaving long stretches of silence where I could hear nothing but the faint crackle of the fire and the blood rushing in my ears. I leaned back, staring at the ridge of a hill about 200 feet away. In the dim light of the fire and the faint glow of the moon, I noticed something moving along the top of it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the eyes, maybe branches swaying. But no, the shape was distinct. It was upright, walking steadily across the ridge. The way it moved was strange, slow but consistent, never stopping to turn or look. It didn't stumble or pause, just walked until it vanished over the far side of the hill, swallowed by the dark. A chill ran through me. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, seeing someone that far from the road didn't make sense. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it could have been a hiker or even another camper scouting around. But the way the figure had moved, so deliberate, without hesitation, sat wrong with me. I stayed by the fire for another hour, feeding it wood to keep it strong. But eventually, I needed more fuel. The pile I had collected earlier was almost gone. With only a flashlight in hand, I stepped into the edge of the forest. The beam of light cut through the darkness, showing the tangle of trees and fallen branches. The air felt colder beneath the canopy, damp and heavy. My boots crunched on leaves and twigs as I searched for dry wood. The silence was heavier in there. I kept stopping to listen, shining the flashlight around, half expecting to see someone standing between the trees. At one point, I froze because I thought I heard something breathing. Heavy, steady breathing, just behind me. I spun around quickly, shining the light through the trees, but nothing was there. My heart thudded, so hard I felt it in my throat. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that maybe I was hearing my own breath echo in the quiet. But then it came again. A deep inhale, then a slow exhale, as if something large was standing just beyond the beam of my light. I gripped the flashlight tighter, sweeping it side to side, but the sound seemed to move away, fading deeper into the woods. Branches shifted somewhere ahead, faint movement that didn't look like wind. Panic gripped me, and I turned back toward the field, carrying only a few sticks of wood I had managed to grab. I walked fast at first, then broke into a jog, stumbling over roots until the trees thinned and I saw the glow of my fire ahead. The open field looked safer than anything at that moment. When I dropped the sticks beside the fire, my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the flashlight too. I sat close to the flames, feeding them until they roared higher. I told myself I would stay awake all night, that I wouldn't risk closing my eyes out here. The thought of something moving around in the dark, unseen, breathing like that, it made my skin crawl. But hours passed, and exhaustion pressed down on me. The fire died lower despite my effort to keep it alive, and my body grew heavy. I crawled into the tent, zipped it up tight, and tried to convince myself I would be safe inside. The nylon walls felt paper thin, every sound outside amplified. I lay there, listening to the night, straining to catch anything unusual. Somewhere out in the field, I heard grass shifting. A slow, deliberate movement, not like wind. My chest tightened, and I held my breath. The sound moved closer, then stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. I didn't dare move. I stayed frozen until my body finally betrayed me, and at some point, I drifted into a restless sleep. I woke before dawn, the air inside the tent cold and damp. My back ached from the hard ground. For a moment, I felt relief, thinking maybe the night had just gotten into my head. But when I stepped outside, the grass near the edge of the field was pressed down in a wide path, leading from the forest toward my camp. I packed up quickly, not bothering to eat or make coffee. My hands trembled as I shoved everything into the trunk of the car. As I pulled out of the field, the sun was just beginning to rise, lighting up the ridge where I had seen the figure walking the night before. In the fresh light, the whole hill was empty, quiet, and harmless looking. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had heard. Someone or something had been there, moving through the dark woods with me, breathing just behind me where I couldn't see. The thought of it stayed with me all the way home, sitting heavy in my chest, and I realized I didn't want to go camping alone again. Not after that night. That was the last time I set up a tent in the middle of nowhere. Every time I think about doing it again, I picture that shape walking across the ridge, steady and unbothered, like it knew I was watching and didn't care. And I remember the sound of breathing that didn't belong to me, drifting through the trees. I left the woods that morning, but I still feel like I never truly got away from whatever was out there. I never thought I would look back on that night and still feel the weight of it pressing on me, but every detail has stayed carved into my memory. It started out like any other trip into the woods, one of those times when the air feels just cool enough that you want to breathe it in deep and let your body relax. I had gone out with a couple of friends, but by late evening I ended up being the one who wandered off alone to collect more wood for the fire. The sky had already shifted into that deep shade of blue where the last light of day fades out and shadows blend together. The field where we had set up our tents was open enough, but just a few steps into the tree line, and it was like walking into a whole other world. The ground was damp, soft in places where leaves had piled over the years, and the smell of pine was thick in the air. I carried only a small flashlight and a bundle of thin twigs under my arm, thinking I would gather some thicker branches before heading back. The forest was alive with small noises, the kind that never seem threatening until you're alone. Crickets chirping, the occasional snap of something moving through brush, the soft hoot of an owl in the distance. Every sound felt sharper than it should have been. I kept glancing back at the faint glow of the fire through the trees, wanting to keep it in sight, but every time I bent down to pick up wood, it seemed further away than I remembered. The ground was uneven and sloped downward in spots, and I found myself drifting deeper than I intended. When I stopped to shift the wood in my arms, I caught the sound of breathing. It wasn't mine. It was heavy, slow at first, but real. I froze. The sound came from behind me, maybe a little to the left, like something standing just far enough in the dark to keep hidden. I turned my flashlight toward the trees, but the thin beam only caught bark and shadows. My chest tightened as the breathing grew louder, then faded like it was moving away. I wanted to believe it was an animal, maybe a deer or something else in the undergrowth, but it hadn't sounded like that. It had sounded deliberate, steady, and almost too close. I crouched low, letting the branches in my arms slide quietly to the ground, and listened. The woods had gone strangely still, as if every insect and bird had decided to keep quiet all at once. I could hear the faint pounding of my own pulse in my ears. I told myself to stand up, to keep walking back to the fire, but my legs felt heavy. I didn't want to turn my back to whatever was out there. I shifted slowly, taking a step backward, my eyes scanning every tree trunk and shadow for movement. The glow from camp had dimmed even more, and I realized I had wandered further than I thought. A low wave of panic pressed on me as I tried to trace my steps back. My flashlight beam shook in my hand, catching bits of moss, broken logs, and patches of earth where roots twisted up. Every few steps I would stop and listen again, convinced the breathing was behind me once more. At times I thought I heard it just over my shoulder, faint and uneven, but every time I spun around the woods showed me nothing. My mind kept telling me it was just an animal, maybe a wild boar or a large dog straying into the woods, but deep down I knew that wasn't right. The breathing had rhythm to it, the kind that matched a person rather than an animal. The silence that followed it was worse, stretching out longer and longer until I found myself desperate to hear anything just so I knew what I was dealing with. As I climbed a small rise, I finally saw the faint flicker of the firelight again, far off through the trees. Relief hit me, but it was shallow, because that's when I noticed something else. On the ridge just above the fire, silhouetted against the faint orange glow, there was movement. A figure. It walked along the crest of the hill, slow, steady, its outline dark and solid against the night sky. It didn't stop. It didn't turn. It just kept a straight path across the ridge until it disappeared over the other side. I stood rooted in place, staring at where it had been, my throat dry. The distance wasn't far, maybe 200 feet at most, but it was close enough to know it wasn't a trick of my eyes. I knew every one of my friends was still at camp, sitting by the fire, and this shape had been moving above them. I wanted to yell, to warn them, but no sound came out of me. Instead, I forced my legs to move, taking careful steps down toward the camp. The wood I had gathered earlier was long forgotten. Every step felt like it echoed too loudly in the quiet woods, my ears straining for that breathing again. When I broke through the last stretch of trees, the firelight hit me fully, and I felt a rush of safety just being in its glow. My friends were sitting there, laughing, unaware of anything out of the ordinary. My body was trembling, sweat sticking to my shirt, even though the night air was cool. I didn't tell them what I had seen, not then. I just sat down by the fire, my eyes darting constantly toward the ridge. But the night wasn't done. Later, when I forced myself to go back near the tree line for one last armful of wood, I heard it again, the breathing. This time it was heavier, closer, and moving between the trunks just inside the forest. I could see faint shifts of shadow, the outline of something slipping through the gaps. It was like watching someone pace back and forth, just out of reach of the firelight. My stomach turned cold, and I dropped the branches I had gathered, stumbling backward until I was back in the circle of light. I stayed there the rest of the night, wide awake, staring toward those trees. The fire burned low, my friends eventually crawling into their tents one by one, their laughter fading until it was only me awake, watching. I never saw the figure again on the ridge, but I could feel it out there, watching in silence. Every time the wind shifted, I thought I heard that faint, steady breathing drifting in from the darkness. By morning, the forest looked ordinary again. Sunlight cut through the branches, birds filled the air with sound, and the ridge was just another hill. My friends teased me for looking tired, and I didn't tell them why I hadn't slept. I didn't want to explain what I had seen, because I knew they wouldn't believe me. But I knew. I knew that somewhere out there, just beyond the edge of where the firelight reached, someone had been standing. Someone had been breathing, waiting, and moving through the trees in silence. And as much as I tried to push it away, I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever it was had been closer to me than I had ever realized. Even now, when I walk in the woods alone, I catch myself listening for it. The slow, heavy sound of breathing that isn't mine. I look at ridges and tree lines longer than I should, waiting to see a shape moving across them. And I know deep down, that night wasn't a mistake or my imagination. It was real, and it left a mark that has never gone away. I remember that day starting out so normal that nothing about it hinted at how it would end. The weather was clear, the sky pale blue, and the air held that late summer heaviness that made everything feel slower. I had gone out early in the morning with the idea of exploring some woods that were about 2 miles from where I lived. I had driven past them plenty of times, always noticing how thick and endless they looked from the road. There was no sign, no trail marker, just a break in the tree line where an old dirt track disappeared into the shadows. It wasn't an official park or anything like that, just a patch of woods that stretched out over hills and fields that no one seemed to use anymore. I parked my car on the shoulder of the road and stood there for a minute, looking into the line of trees. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Even though cars passed occasionally on the road, the sound seemed to fade quickly once you stepped close to the woods. The trees crowded together tightly, dark bark and branches pressing in, and it gave off that heavy feeling like you were about to step into another world. Not in a magical sense, but in a way that reminded you how small you were. I had no real plan. I just wanted to walk, maybe see how far I could go before it got too late. The dirt path was soft under my shoes, scattered with dead leaves, sticks, and the occasional patch of mud where the ground still held on to rainwater from days before. At first, it was simple walking. The path bent gently and led deeper in, the trees arching overhead, branches scraping lightly in the breeze. The air cooled as I moved further, the sun dimming behind the thick canopy. I found myself glancing back more than once, not because I was scared, but because the road and the open sky seemed to vanish so quickly behind me. Within minutes, it felt like I was sealed inside the woods. I kept going, letting the path take me further. Birds moved somewhere above, leaves crackled under the tiny feet of squirrels or chipmunks, but otherwise it was strangely empty. The deeper I went, the less I heard. The stillness was heavy, like even the animals didn't want to be too loud here. The path eventually split, though it wasn't a clear split, more like the main track fading and two thinner ones pushing off in different directions. I chose the one on the left, more out of instinct than anything else. As I walked, I noticed small details that added up slowly. Old branches that had clearly been broken by something heavy, marks in the dirt that didn't look like boots, and even a faint smell that reminded me of something animal, musky and sour. I pushed it out of my mind, telling myself deer probably moved through here. Every so often I would stop and listen, thinking I heard movement in the distance, but it always faded before I could focus on it. After what felt like an hour, I realized I had lost all sense of direction. The path had twisted so many times that I couldn't picture how to get back. The woods all looked the same, tall trunks and layers of brush and bramble, no landmarks to hold on to. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, checking the time and signal. It was nearly 3 in the afternoon, and I had only one bar of service that flickered in and out. I figured I had plenty of time before dark, but I didn't like how quickly the light seemed to fade under the trees. I kept walking, telling myself that paths always connected somewhere. The ground dipped into a small hollow, damp and spongy under my feet, before rising again into thicker growth. That was when I first felt it, someone watching. It wasn't a sound, not even movement I could see, just that pressure on the back of my neck, the weight of eyes. I stopped cold, listening. Nothing. Not a single bird, not even the rustle of wind in the branches. The woods had gone silent. I told myself it was my imagination and kept moving, but every so often, I glanced over my shoulder. Shadows looked like figures standing still. Trees seemed closer together. I tried to focus on small details, like the patterns in the bark or the way the ground bent, to distract myself. But the feeling only grew heavier. At some point, I heard it, clear enough to know it wasn't in my head. Footsteps. Not close, not heavy, but steady, pacing in the distance behind me. I froze, standing perfectly still, and the sound stopped. My chest tightened. I waited, barely breathing, eyes darting across the trees. After a long stretch of silence, I started walking again, this time slower, lighter. A few minutes passed, and I heard it again. The same rhythm, the same distance. Whoever or whatever it was keeping pace with me. I tried to convince myself it could be an animal, but the steps were too measured, too evenly spaced. Deer move in bursts, not like this. The realization crawled through me like ice. I didn't run, though every instinct screamed at me to. Running felt like it would confirm something, that I knew I was being followed. Instead, I kept walking, listening to every sound, every shift of air, every crack underfoot. The path narrowed until it nearly vanished, forcing me through brush that scraped against my arms and legs. The further I went, the more closed in it felt. I finally came to a small clearing, an open patch surrounded by thick growth. I stopped there, partly to catch my breath, partly because I didn't know which way to go. The silence pressed in again. I scanned the trees slowly, eyes tracing every gap, every shadow. Then I saw it. Not clearly, not enough to make out details, but movement. A shape slipping between two trees and vanishing. It wasn't close, maybe 50 feet away, but it was there. My stomach sank. I felt pinned, caught in the open clearing with nowhere to hide. I forced myself to move again, picking one direction and pushing through. The undergrowth was thicker now, clawing at my clothes, catching my ankles. My breathing was louder than I wanted it to be. Every few minutes, I looked back, always half expecting to see someone step out. By now, the sun had dropped lower, and though I couldn't see it through the canopy, I could feel the dimness growing. The woods took on a darker, grayer tone. I pulled out my phone again, hoping to use the GPS, but the signal was gone completely. The screen showed nothing but a blank map. My battery had already slipped down to 30%. I stuffed it back into my pocket and kept going. The footsteps behind me returned, closer now, though still hidden in the trees. My pulse hammered so hard that I felt it in my throat. I sped up, breaking branches under my feet, not caring about the noise anymore. All I wanted was to get out, to see the open sky again. The terrain shifted into a slope, rocks jutting out, loose dirt sliding under my shoes. I climbed quickly, hands grabbing roots and trunks to pull myself up. At the top, I stopped and looked back down. The shadows at the bottom shifted. For a second, I thought I saw a figure, tall and still, but by the time I blinked, it was gone. My breathing was ragged, chest tight, but I pushed forward again. The woods seemed endless. Every rise led only to more trees. Darkness came fast. The light faded until the woods were nothing but outlines, trunks like black walls against darker shadows. My steps slowed, partly from exhaustion, partly from the fear of tripping on unseen roots. I pulled my phone out one last time, using the dim flashlight. The weak beam cut a narrow path ahead of me, everything else swallowed by black. That was when the sound changed. The footsteps weren't behind me anymore. They were to the side, moving parallel, breaking branches in the dark. My mouth went dry. I turned the flashlight that way, but it hit nothing except trees. I spun slowly, the beam shaking in my trembling hand. Nothing. I started moving faster, almost stumbling, the light bouncing wildly. Then, out of the corner of the beam, something moved. A definite shape, crouched low, slipping back into the shadows. I didn't think. I ran. Branches tore at me, the ground uneven, my legs burning. The light swung uselessly, but I didn't dare turn it off. The sound of pursuit followed, closer now, heavier, crashing through the undergrowth. I pushed harder, lungs screaming, heart pounding so loud it drowned everything else out. After what felt like forever, I burst into another clearing. This one was larger, and through the trees on the far side, I saw it, the faint glow of the road. Headlights passed, a car moving along in the distance. Relief surged through me so hard my knees almost gave out. I stumbled toward it, tripping, scraping my hands on rocks, but I didn't stop. The last stretch was a blur, crashing through brush until I broke free onto the edge of the road. Cars passed occasionally, the sight of them grounding me, pulling me back into reality. I turned once, looking back into the wall of trees I had come from. It was silent again, still and dark. Whatever had followed me hadn't come out. It stayed hidden in the woods, watching, waiting. I walked the shoulder back to my car, every step shaky. When I finally unlocked it and slid inside, I sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, staring out at the tree line. The woods looked ordinary from the road, quiet and harmless, but I knew better. I knew something was in there, moving in the dark, keeping pace with me. When I finally started the engine and drove away, the relief was hollow. My body was safe, but my mind stayed back there, trapped in the silence, in the weight of being watched. I didn't tell anyone about it. I couldn't explain it right without sounding paranoid. But I knew what I felt, and I knew what I heard. To this day, I don't go near those woods. I don't even slow down when I drive past. I keep my eyes forward, hands tight on the wheel, because I can still feel it, the steady rhythm of footsteps behind me, matching every move just out of sight. I had been looking forward to that weekend for weeks. Work had been draining me, and I felt like I needed to step away from everything, even if only for a short while. I chose to go out into the woods, a place far enough from the city where there would be no cars, no people, no distractions, just silence and nature. I packed my bag with what I thought I would need: food, water, sleeping bag, a tent, a flashlight, and a few extra clothes. The idea was simple: find a quiet spot, set up camp, and let the calmness of the woods reset me. The drive out there was long. I kept watching the road get narrower, the trees pressing closer from both sides. By the time I finally turned off onto the dirt path that led into the forest, I hadn't seen another vehicle for nearly half an hour. That gave me both comfort and unease. On one hand, I was finally getting the solitude I wanted. On the other, I was realizing just how far away I was from help if anything went wrong. Still, I kept going. The road ended in a rough clearing where I parked the car. I shouldered my backpack and started walking deeper into the woods, searching for a place to set up camp. The sun was already getting low, slipping behind the tops of the trees. The light was soft, filtered through the leaves, and the shadows stretched long across the ground. I walked until I found a small clearing not far from a ridge. It seemed like a good spot. The ground was mostly level, and there was a ring of trees that made me feel sheltered. I dropped my pack, unrolled my tent, and began setting it up. The silence around me was heavy. There were no cars, no voices, not even the distant hum of power lines. Just the occasional rustle of leaves when the wind moved through them, and the faint chirping of birds getting ready to settle in for the night. Once the tent was up, I gathered some dry branches and twigs to make a fire. The light was fading fast, and I wanted warmth and visibility before darkness swallowed everything. When the fire caught, the crackle of it was almost too loud in the stillness. I sat near it, eating from a pack of jerky, sipping water, and staring into the flames. For a while, it was peaceful. I could hear crickets starting up their nightly song. The stars began to poke through the darkening sky above me. I leaned back against my pack, feeling my muscles loosen. It must have been about an hour later when I noticed movement on the ridge beyond the clearing. It was subtle at first, a shifting shadow among shadows. I sat up straighter, trying to focus my eyes. Then I saw it clearly. A figure, upright, moving steadily along the ridge. It was too far away for me to make out details, but the way it moved was unmistakable. Someone was walking out there. My stomach tightened. I wasn't expecting to see anyone this far in. The ridge was at least 200 feet away, and whoever it was didn't stop, didn't look toward me, just kept walking across, and eventually disappeared down the other side. I told myself it could be another camper, maybe a hunter heading back, maybe just someone passing through. But the fact that they hadn't carried a light of any kind made my skin crawl. By then it was nearly dark, and moving through the woods without a flashlight or lantern seemed reckless. I tried to shake it off. People have their reasons. I wasn't in danger just because someone else was nearby. Still, I found myself glancing at the ridge more than I wanted to. Later, I decided I should collect more firewood to keep the flames strong through the night. I grabbed a small light and wandered a short distance into the woods. I didn't want to go far, but I knew I'd need enough wood to last. The ground was soft under my boots, covered in a thick layer of dead leaves and pine needles. Every step crunched loud in the quiet night. I crouched, picking up sticks, breaking off dead branches, stacking them under one arm. That was when I heard it, a sound behind me. At first, I thought it was just the wind shifting, or maybe an animal in the underbrush. But it was steady, rhythmic, heavy breathing, the kind of sound a person makes when they're tired or exerting themselves. I froze where I was, every muscle locked. The light from my flashlight shook slightly in my hand. I turned, sweeping the beam across the trees, but there was nothing there. Just trunks and shadows. The breathing didn't stop. It was faint, not close enough for me to see anyone, but not far enough to dismiss. It was behind the trees, moving. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing straight. My first thought was that it was the figure I had seen on the ridge. That made sense. But what didn't make sense was why they would be standing just inside the woods, close enough for me to hear them breathing, but not speaking, not making themselves known. I stepped back, clutching the pile of sticks tighter. I didn't run immediately, but my body was telling me to get out of there. Then the breathing shifted. It grew fainter, as though whoever it was had started moving away. I could hear branches snapping, a shuffle between the trees, and then silence. No more breathing, no more movement, just gone. I didn't hesitate after that. I I turned and walked quickly back to the clearing, almost breaking into a jog. My heart was pounding so hard I felt it in my throat. When I reached the firelight, I dropped the sticks onto the pile and fed a few into the flames. My hands were trembling, and I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were still on me from somewhere in the darkness. I sat by the fire, trying to steady myself. The night stretched long. Every little sound in the woods seemed amplified. I kept checking over my shoulder, scanning the tree line, staring at the ridge. Nothing came out, but my nerves stayed on edge. I told myself over and over that I was just letting fear twist things. The figure had been far off. The breathing could have been an animal. My mind was playing tricks in the dark. But no matter how I tried to explain it, I couldn't settle into comfort again. When it was finally time to try to sleep, I crawled into my tent and zipped it shut. The fabric walls felt thin, flimsy, like they wouldn't protect me from anything. I lay on my back, listening. Every creak, every pop of the fire outside made me tense. Hours dragged on. The forest had gone quieter, but in that quiet, I felt something worse, like the silence wasn't natural, like it was waiting. At some point, exhaustion finally pulled me under. My sleep was restless, filled with half-formed dreams that always ended with me jolting awake, straining to hear if something was moving outside. Each time I checked, I saw nothing, but the unease never left. When morning finally came, I stepped out into the clearing, the sunlight making the woods seem far less menacing. The fire had burned low to ashes. Everything looked ordinary, but the memory of the night, of that figure on the ridge, of that breathing in the trees, sat heavy in my chest. I broke down the camp quickly, stuffing everything back into my bag. I didn't even bother with breakfast. I just wanted to leave. The hike back to my car felt longer than it had on the way in. I kept glancing behind me, half expecting to see someone following. The woods were quiet again, but I didn't trust that quiet anymore. When I finally stepped out into the clearing where my car was parked, relief washed through me. I threw my gear into the trunk, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The sound of it was jarring after so much silence, but it grounded me. I drove back down the dirt path, back onto the narrow road, not looking in the mirrors more than I had to. By the time I reached the highway, I could almost convince myself I had let paranoia take control. Almost. But deep down, I knew what I had heard. Heavy breathing, human, close enough that I could feel it in my bones. Someone had been out there, moving between the trees, watching. Even now, the thought of it sticks with me. The idea that someone could be in the woods, not announcing themselves, not passing by, not camping, just there. Watching, waiting. I don't know what they wanted, or why they chose not to approach. Maybe they were testing how close they could get without being seen. Maybe they just enjoyed the idea of someone knowing they were being watched, but not being able to do anything about it. Whatever the reason, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I wouldn't be going back out there alone again. The woods were beautiful, quiet, and endless, but they weren't empty. They never are. I remember the day I decided to take a trip out into the woods alone. I had been putting it off for months, telling myself I was too busy, that I didn't have the right gear, that I'd wait until the weather was just a little better. But one morning I woke up restless, needing to get away from the noise and routine of everyday life, and I packed my bag without much thought. I threw in a small tent, a sleeping bag, some food, a knife, and a flashlight. I wasn't planning to stay long, maybe just a night or two, but enough to breathe in the quiet and remind myself what it felt like to be out there with no one around. The drive was long, and the further I went, the more the world seemed to empty out behind me. The roads turned narrower, the houses spaced farther apart, until eventually I wasn't seeing any at all. It was just trees on both sides, stretching up and over me like walls closing in, and I kept pushing deeper. When I finally parked at the side of a dirt track, I shouldered my bag and started walking. The path wasn't marked, but I had studied maps enough to know the general direction I wanted to go. The forest seemed to swallow sound as I stepped off the road. Leaves crunched under my boots, and I noticed how heavy the air felt, damp and earthy. My shirt stuck to my back almost immediately, but I told myself it was nothing. The quiet was good. The quiet was what I came for. I walked for hours before I settled on a small clearing not far from a slow-moving creek. It looked like the right spot, flat ground with just enough space for my tent. I set it up, taking my time, making sure the stakes were firm in the soil. The sun was beginning to slide lower, shadows stretching across the trees, so I gathered some wood and started a small fire. The flames were comforting, throwing light against the darkness creeping in. I ate, sat by the fire, and watched the stars appear one by one through the breaks in the canopy. I should have gone to sleep early, but I stayed up staring into the fire until the logs broke down into glowing embers. The forest felt alive in a way that made me restless. Every snap of a branch or rustle of leaves seemed sharper than it should have been. I told myself it was just animals moving about, nothing unusual, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was aware of me being there. Eventually, I forced myself into the tent and zipped it shut. The night dragged on. I kept waking up, unsure if I had even slept at all. At one point, I was certain I heard steady footsteps moving past the tent, slow and deliberate, not the scurrying of an animal. I held my breath, waiting for them to fade, but they stopped completely, like whoever or whatever it was had frozen right outside. I didn't move. I stayed still for what felt like hours until exhaustion eventually won, and I drifted back into uneasy sleep. When morning came, I stepped outside and tried to shake off the heaviness in my head. Everything looked normal. The fire was cold, the clearing empty. I convinced myself I had imagined the footsteps, just my brain playing tricks while I hovered between sleep and waking. I boiled some water by the fire and ate a small breakfast, then decided to explore further into the woods. The air was cooler that morning, and the light filtered down through the trees in sharp beams. I followed the creek upstream for a while, listening to the trickle of water, trying to enjoy the stillness. But as I moved deeper, I noticed faint impressions in the mud along the bank. At first I thought they were animal tracks, maybe deer, but the longer I looked, the less certain I felt. They were wide, almost like the shape of a bare foot, though distorted by mud and water. I left the creek behind and wandered back toward the direction of camp, trying not to think too much about what I had seen. But when I reached the clearing, I froze. My tent had shifted. The stakes were still in the ground, but the whole thing looked slightly turned, pulled at from one side. The flap was open, even though I was certain I had zipped it shut when I left. I checked inside. My bag was there, but the contents were different. My food pack had been opened, and some of it was gone. I stood there staring, my skin prickling. Maybe an animal had torn into it, I told myself, but there were no claw marks or teeth marks. It was neat, like someone had unzipped, opened, and helped themselves. I looked around the tree line, scanning the shadows, but saw nothing. That night, I tried to tell myself it wasn't worth worrying about. I rebuilt the fire, kept it burning bigger than the night before, and sat close to it. The forest pressed in tighter with every hour, the darkness thicker. Around midnight, I thought I heard movement again. This time it wasn't just footsteps. It was breathing, low and heavy, shifting closer and farther, like someone circling. My chest tightened, and I gripped my knife without thinking. I didn't call out, didn't shine my flashlight. I just waited. At some point the noises stopped, but I didn't sleep again. I sat awake, eyes burning, every muscle tense, until dawn broke. When light finally crept in, I checked the clearing again. Nothing seemed touched, but I couldn't shake the certainty that someone had been there watching. I packed my things quickly, stuffing everything into my bag without care. I wanted to leave. I wanted to put distance between myself and that clearing, but the forest was disorienting. The trail I thought I knew was harder to follow, the trees unfamiliar. I walked for hours, sweat dripping down my face, trying to keep calm, but the deeper I went, the more I felt eyes on me. I would stop suddenly, spin around, and catch the faintest motion between the trees, something slipping back out of sight. By late afternoon, I knew I wasn't going to make it back to the road before dark. I set up my tent again in another small clearing, farther from the creek this time. I didn't build a fire. I sat in the tent with my knife on my lap, listening. Every sound carried. Every twig snap made my heart pound. The silence between was worse, stretching on until I imagined shapes moving in the dark. The night dragged like the last, but this time I heard it clearer. The same slow steps, not rushing, not panicked, just moving with purpose. The weight of each one pressed into the earth, steady and patient. They stopped again near my tent. I held my breath, eyes locked on the thin wall of fabric separating me from whatever was outside. Then I heard the soft scrape of fingers, dragging slowly down the side of the tent. My skin went cold. I didn't move. The sound stopped after a while, and the silence returned, but I didn't sleep at all. When the sky finally lightened again, I left everything. I didn't bother to pack the tent, didn't care about the food. I just grabbed my bag and started walking. I kept moving, barely stopping, forcing myself forward no matter how tired my legs felt. Hours later, I finally stumbled onto the dirt track where I had left my car. Relief almost dropped me to my knees. But when I reached the vehicle, the relief turned into dread. The driver's side door was cracked open. I knew I had locked it. I knew I had shut it tight. Inside, the contents of my glove box were scattered, papers tossed, like someone had been searching through them. Nothing was stolen that I could tell, but the way everything was moved felt deliberate. I sat behind the wheel, hands shaking, and started the engine. I didn't look back at the trees as I drove, didn't slow down until miles had put themselves between me and that place. Even now, I think about it. The way the footsteps stopped right outside, the scrape along the fabric, the food taken carefully, not torn apart. Someone had been out there, watching me, moving when I moved, waiting when I waited. I still wonder how long they had followed me, and how much closer they would have come if I had stayed another night. It was the first time I went camping alone, and it was the last. It started out as a normal day, the kind of day where nothing feels like it could possibly go wrong. I had planned a simple hike, something I often did to get out of the noise of town and give my head some space. The air was warm, but not too hot, and the sky had a soft pale color, like it was tired from the summer sun. I parked my car at the edge of a dirt road where the trees pressed in thick on both sides, shouldered my backpack, and started up the trail. The forest swallowed the sound of the road behind me until all I could hear was the crunch of gravel under my boots and the distant hum of insects that seemed to rise and fall like waves. The deeper I went, the quieter everything became. The trail cut through pines and oaks, their branches closing above my head until the light turned dim, filtered through layers of leaves. I liked that kind of silence, the kind that made you feel like you were miles away from anyone, even if civilization wasn't too far. But there's a difference between silence that comforts you and silence that feels too heavy, the kind that makes you pay attention without realizing you're doing it. The further I walked, the more I noticed that feeling creeping in. After about an hour, I reached a clearing. It was nothing big, just an open patch of dry grass with a few logs scattered around, maybe left from when someone had cut wood years back. I sat down to drink water and rest my legs. My phone had no signal, which wasn't a surprise out here, but it made me uneasy in a way I couldn't explain. I was used to being alone in the woods, but there was something about the air that felt heavier than usual, like the trees were holding something in their branches. I shook it off and decided to push on a little further, deeper than I usually went. The trail narrowed, roots crisscrossing the ground like veins, making me slow my steps. Every so often I heard the snap of a twig in the distance. At first, I thought it was deer. There are plenty of them around here, and I'd seen them often before. But the sound didn't move away when I paused. It stopped when I stopped, then started again when I continued. That detail stuck in my head, even as I tried to brush it off. Animals don't usually mirror you so perfectly. I told myself maybe it was just coincidence, or maybe I was imagining it. But my chest felt tight in a way that told me I wasn't imagining anything. I kept going until the trail dipped down into a shallow ravine where a dry creek bed cut through the dirt. The air was cooler there, and shadows stretched longer than they should have for the time of day. I crouched down, tracing the line of the creek with my eyes. The soil was soft, and I noticed prints pressed into it. They weren't paw prints. They were boots. Fresh, too. I could see the edges of the tread, sharp and clean. Someone had walked through here not long before me. The prints were big, larger than mine, and spaced wide apart like whoever made them had a long stride. My throat felt dry. I hadn't seen anyone else on the trail all day, not even in the parking area. There weren't supposed to be people out here. I stood still for a long time, staring at those prints, listening for anything beyond the wind brushing the leaves. That's when I caught it again, the sound of movement, closer this time. A shuffle, the faint scrape of something against bark. My shoulders tightened. I looked around but saw nothing between the trees, only shadows that seemed thicker than before. I told myself it wasn't unusual. People hunt out here sometimes, or maybe someone else was hiking off trail. Still, the prints made my skin crawl. I didn't want to follow them, but the trail crossed the creek right where they were, and I had to step past them to keep going. I walked faster now, the straps of my pack rubbing against my shoulders, my heartbeat a little too loud in my ears. The feeling of being watched clung to me, not constant, but coming in waves, strong enough that I turned my head every few minutes expecting to see someone. The woods seemed to press closer. The air smelled damp, like moss and old soil, even though it hadn't rained in weeks. My boots crunched over sticks, and every sound felt too loud. At one point I thought I saw movement through the trees, a flicker of shape, but when I focused, it was gone. I tried to tell myself it was just branches swaying, but the air was dead still. I don't know how long I walked before I finally admitted I wasn't comfortable anymore. The sun had shifted lower, streaks of light breaking through the canopy in sharp angles, and I realized if I didn't turn back soon, I'd be walking the trail in near darkness. I decided I'd had enough for the day. I turned around and started retracing my steps, trying to move at a steady pace without looking like I was hurrying. My body wanted to sprint, but I knew that would only make me careless. The whole time, I kept feeling that prickling between my shoulder blades, the kind that made me think something was a few steps behind me even though I didn't hear it. By the time I reached the creek bed again, the light had dropped even more. The boot prints were still there, but now there were more of them, overlapping in messy directions. My stomach turned when I realized they hadn't been there earlier. Someone had walked through here again since I passed. I crouched, staring at the dirt. The impressions looked fresh, the soil still dark around the edges. My eyes kept tracking the prints until I saw where they veered off the trail, straight into the trees. I didn't follow them. I didn't even want to look too long. My mouth was dry, my hands shaking as I tightened the straps of my pack and forced myself forward. The forest grew darker by the minute. I walked faster, almost jogging now. Every sound around me amplified. A branch cracked somewhere off to my left, and I froze. The sound wasn't faint. It was close, too close, like someone had stepped hard on a stick. My head turned on instinct, scanning the trees, but all I saw were dark trunks stacked together. I could feel eyes on me. I was sure of it. My legs moved on their own, carrying me forward faster than before, my breath short and harsh. I didn't look back again. I couldn't. Some part of me knew if I saw what was there, I'd break into a full sprint, and I wouldn't be able to stop. When I finally reached the clearing with the logs, I stopped for just a second to catch my breath. My shirt clung to my back with sweat, and I could hear my pulse pounding. The clearing should have felt safe, more open than the suffocating trees, but it didn't. The grass was still, the logs exactly where they'd been before, yet I felt no relief. It was worse somehow, like I'd stepped into a stage where the trees were the audience, waiting for something. I didn't sit down this time. I didn't drink water. I just kept moving. The last stretch back to the car felt endless. The shadows blurred together until the path looked different, less familiar. I forced myself to keep walking straight, to not panic. Then I saw it, lying right in the middle of the trail about 20 feet ahead. A cigarette butt still smoldering. Thin smoke curled into the air, faint but undeniable. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. There had been no one on the trail when I started, no one in the parking area, no signs of anyone at all. And yet here it was, fresh, as if whoever had dropped it knew I'd be coming down this way. I didn't stop. I didn't even let myself slow down. I stepped around it and kept moving, my legs shaking so badly I could barely keep balance on the uneven dirt. The trees thinned out eventually, and I caught sight of the faint gleam of metal ahead, my car, parked right where I left it. Relief hit me so hard my knees almost buckled. But then I noticed something that made my stomach lurch. The driver's side door was slightly open. Not wide, just cracked, like someone had tested it and left it that way. I had locked it before heading out. I was sure of it. I always double-checked. I stood there for what felt like forever, staring at that sliver of darkness between the door and the frame. The woods behind me felt heavier, the silence pressing closer with every second I hesitated. Finally, I forced myself forward, gripping the straps of my backpack so tight my fingers hurt. I circled the car once, checking the windows, glancing into the back seat. Nothing. No one. The door creaked when I pulled it open the rest of the way, the sound far too loud in the still air. The seats were empty. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it, except for one detail. The faint smell of smoke inside, like someone had sat there not long ago. I got in, slammed the lock down, and started the engine. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror again and again, half expecting to see someone step out of the trees. The road out was rough, my tires crunching over gravel, dust rising in clouds behind me. I didn't look back. Not once. The weight in my chest didn't ease until I hit the highway, and saw other cars again, their headlights cutting through the dark. Even now, I don't know who was out there or what they wanted. Maybe it was just someone wandering the woods, maybe a hunter, maybe something worse. All I know is that I wasn't alone, and whoever it was, they wanted me to know it. I never liked walking home late at night, but sometimes I had no choice. That night, everything seemed heavier, even the air itself. The streets were quiet in that way that doesn't feel peaceful, just empty, like something was missing. I kept my hands stuffed into my jacket pockets, my head low, counting the cracks in the sidewalk as I walked. There weren't many lights on in the houses I passed. Most windows were dark, curtains drawn, doors shut tight. It made the road feel longer, like each step only pushed me further into silence. I took the same route I always did, cutting through a small wooded path that shaved 10 minutes off the walk. I had walked it hundreds of times, and though I never loved the way the trees swallowed the sky and blocked out what little light the moon offered, it was faster, and I always told myself it was fine. But that night, as I reached the edge of the path, I hesitated. The air inside the trees looked darker than usual, thicker, almost black. I told myself it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks after a long day. I stepped in anyway. The crunch of leaves under my shoes was louder than I remembered. Every step echoed, like the woods were emptying all their sound into mine. I could hear my own breathing too, heavy and uneven, even though I wasn't tired. The path wound into the trees, the dirt trail packed down from years of use. Branches hung low, and the smell of damp soil lingered in the air. My eyes kept flicking to the shadows at the edges of the path. It was the kind of darkness you couldn't stare into for too long. The more you looked, the more it felt like something was looking back. Halfway through, I noticed it. The sound. At first, I thought it was just the echo of my own steps, but then I realized it wasn't. There was another rhythm mixed in with mine. Softer, slower, but definitely there. I stopped walking, and the sound stopped too. My chest tightened. I waited, listening so hard that my ears almost rang with the silence. Then I started again, quicker this time, and after a few steps, there it was again, just behind me, almost in sync, but not quite. I didn't want to turn around, but the pressure in my gut made me glance over my shoulder anyway. Nothing, just black trees and empty brush. The trail behind me looked like a tunnel swallowing itself in shadow. I tried to calm myself, convincing my mind that maybe it was just the wind shifting the branches, maybe a stray animal moving in the undergrowth. I walked faster. The sound followed again. Still soft, still just barely behind me. I felt the sweat gathering at the base of my neck. The woods seemed longer than ever, the path stretching out like it had no end. My feet pressed harder into the ground, carrying me faster forward. My heartbeat picked up, and the air felt too thin to fill my lungs properly. I passed a spot I knew well, a crooked tree that leaned over the path like an arch normally. It marked the last third of the trail, the part that always seemed to fly by. But tonight, I felt no relief at seeing it. If anything, it made the dread heavier. The steps behind me seemed closer now, quicker, trying to match me. I tried not to look, but I couldn't help it. I whipped around again. Nothing. Just the empty path, the leaning tree, and the shadows stacked on top of each other. I turned back and forced myself forward. The faster I went, the louder my breathing got. My shoes scraped against the dirt in messy strides. That was when I heard it, something new. Not just footsteps. Breathing. Low, rough, uneven, like someone struggling to stay quiet but failing. It came from behind me, faint but real, and the moment I heard it, the air seemed to freeze around me. My body stiffened, but I couldn't stop moving. Every instinct screamed at me to run, so I did. I ran harder than I had in years, my arms pumping, my shoes pounding the ground. The trees blurred into streaks of black on both sides. The sound behind me grew sharper, heavier, no longer soft and cautious. Whoever, or whatever, it was, they were running now too. The rhythm was clear, chasing mine, gaining ground with each second. The trail twisted and turned, and I fought to stay upright, my lungs burning, my legs screaming. I kept expecting a hand to grab me from behind, to drag me down into the dirt, but nothing touched me. I pushed harder, trying to think only of the light at the end of the path. I knew once I got out of the trees, I would see the road, the faint glow of a street lamp, and maybe then I'd be safe. But the light never came. The path stretched on, bending again and again, each curve only revealing more darkness. My panic grew sharper. Had I missed a turn? Was I running in circles? The woods looked the same in every direction. My breath came out in ragged bursts now, and the steps behind me were so close I swore I could feel the vibrations in the ground. I forced myself forward until my chest felt like it would split open. Then, all at once, the trees broke. I stumbled out onto the open road, the sudden space and light hitting me so hard I almost collapsed. My legs wobbled under me, and I bent over, gasping for air. I looked back into the path, expecting to see something burst out of the trees after me. But nothing came. The woods were still, quiet again, the path behind me empty. I waited there for what felt like forever, staring into the darkness, my whole body shaking. Finally, I straightened up and forced myself to walk home. Every step down that road felt heavy, my ears straining for any sound that didn't belong. When I reached my house, I locked the door and stood at the window, staring out into the night. My heart wouldn't slow down. The woods were still there, silent and unmoving, but I couldn't stop imagining the sound of breathing in the dark, just a few steps behind me. The next day, I told myself I'd go back and walk the trail in daylight, just to prove to myself there was nothing there. But I never did. Something about the way those steps matched mine, the way the breathing pressed against my ears, told me it wasn't just my imagination. And even though I never saw anything, I knew that night I wasn't alone. I still use that road sometimes, but I never set foot on the trail again. Every time I pass it, I feel my throat tighten, and I can't help but look at the opening in the trees. It looks normal in the day, but at night it swallows light whole. And I know if I stepped inside, I'd hear it again. The steps, the breathing, and the feeling of someone right there behind me, waiting for me to look back. I've thought about it so many times, about what would have happened if I had tripped, if I had slowed down, if I had turned around one more time. And the truth is, I don't think I would have made it out. That thought alone keeps me away. Even now, years later, whenever I walk alone at night, I catch myself checking behind me more than I should, listening harder than necessary, and breathing faster than the pace deserves. Because once you've felt something chasing you in the dark, once you've known for certain that something was there even if you never saw it, you don't ever really walk alone again. It was supposed to be just another quiet night outdoors, a small camping trip I had planned for myself because I wanted to get away from everything for a while. I had been feeling burned out from work and the noise of the city. I wanted silence, the kind you only really find when you're far away from roads, from traffic, from people. I picked a place not too far from home, but far enough that I could actually feel alone. There was a patch of woods I had read about online, a place with no official campsites, no signs, just miles of trees and rough trails. That's what I wanted, something that felt untouched. I packed light. Just a tent, a sleeping bag, a small cooler with food, some water bottles, a flashlight, and a hatchet for firewood. Nothing fancy. I left late in the afternoon, parked my car at the edge of a gravel road, and walked into the woods with the sun still up but already dipping lower. The air had that cool bite of evening, where the shadows between trees get darker faster than you expect. I picked a spot in a clearing where I could see the sky. There was tall grass, a thin line of trees behind me, and thicker woods farther down the slope of the hill. I set up my tent, gathered a pile of firewood, and built a small fire before the sun dropped all the way. The crackle of burning wood felt comforting. I cooked a small meal, nothing special, just heated some food and sat in the glow of the fire. The silence out there was deep. No cars, no voices, just the sound of crickets and the occasional breeze pushing through the leaves. For a while, it was perfect, exactly what I wanted. Then, as the light faded and the sky turned dark, I noticed something. Across the ridge, maybe 200 feet away, there was movement. A figure, just barely visible in the dim light, walking along the top of the hill. I could see the shape against the fading sky, the outline of a person moving steadily. They didn't stop, didn't look in my direction, just walked in a straight line across the ridge, and then disappeared over the other side. It should not have bothered me, but it did. I was in the middle of nowhere. I hadn't seen another car on the road, no houses, no camps. What were the chances that someone else happened to be here, walking at that exact spot at nightfall? I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just another hiker, maybe someone who knew the area better than me. Still, the thought of being watched from a distance left a weight in my chest. I sat by the fire until it burned down low. I didn't want to waste all the wood too soon, so I let it die out and went to collect more branches from the edge of the woods. I kept my flashlight off at first, letting my eyes adjust, but the darkness under the trees was heavy. I clicked the light on and moved deeper in. That's when I heard it. Breathing. Slow, heavy, close enough that I froze where I stood. It wasn't the sound of my own breath echoing in my ears. It was something behind me. The kind of sound that doesn't belong in a place like this, not when you're supposed to be alone. I spun around with the flashlight, the beam slicing through the trees, bouncing off trunks and branches. Nothing, but the sound was there. I could hear it moving, shifting between trees. It wasn't fast. It didn't crash through the underbrush like an animal startled by the light. It moved slowly, like it didn't care if I knew it was there. My throat went dry. The woods around me felt suddenly alive with shadows. I tried to convince myself it was a deer, maybe even a bear, but the breathing had rhythm, the kind of rhythm that comes from a person. I backed up, every muscle in my body tense, and then I heard it again, farther away now. The breathing pulled back into the woods, steady but distant, like whoever, or whatever, it was had decided to leave. I didn't wait around to see if it came back. I turned and ran out of the woods, my flashlight bouncing with each step until I broke back into the clearing and saw the outline of my tent. I stumbled into the campsite, dropped the wood I had managed to gather, and tried to catch my breath. My heart was pounding so hard it made my chest hurt. I sat by the fire pit, feeding the flames until it burned brighter again. The light made me feel safer, but not safe enough. The silence outside the ring of firelight was deeper now, heavy in a way that made every sound stand out. The crickets had quieted, and even the breeze seemed to have stopped. Hours passed slowly. I didn't go back into the woods. I sat by the fire until it turned into embers again, then forced myself into the tent. I zipped it shut, even though I knew the thin fabric wouldn't stop anything that wanted to get inside. Every small sound outside made my body tighten. A snapping branch, a rustle of grass. The memory of that breathing stayed with me, circling in my head, repeating with each beat of my heart. When sleep finally came, it was shallow and broken. I woke often, straining my ears in the dark, waiting for footsteps. At some point in the middle of the night, I thought I heard something brush against the side of the tent. Just a faint drag, like a hand or shoulder sliding past. I lay frozen, my fists clenched, staring into the dark. But nothing else happened. By the time the sky started to lighten, I felt drained, like I hadn't really slept at all. The air was damp, and the fire had gone cold. I packed up quickly, shoving things into my bag without caring how neatly. I just wanted to be out of there. When I started back toward the car, I had to pass near the ridge where I had seen that figure the night before. I kept my eyes on the ground, but then I noticed something in the dirt. Footprints. Not animal tracks, but clear shoe prints pressed into the soil, heading down the slope into the woods. They were fresh. Too fresh. The hair on the back of my neck rose. I didn't stop to study them. I didn't want to know how close they had come to where I was sleeping. I just moved faster, my eyes darting between trees, every sense screaming at me to keep going. When I finally saw my car at the edge of the gravel road, relief washed over me, but it was thin. I kept looking behind me as I unlocked the door and threw my bag inside. The woods looked quiet still, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was standing just beyond the tree line, watching me leave. I started the engine and drove, gravel crunching under the tires, not slowing down until the woods were far behind me. Even then, the weight in my chest stayed. The memory of that breathing, steady and human, followed me home and has never fully left. Sometimes late at night when the world is quiet, I catch myself straining to hear it again, that sound of someone too close in the dark, just beyond the reach of light, waiting. I had been driving all day, and my body ached from sitting behind the wheel for so many hours. The late summer sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving only a faint orange glow fading into the darkening sky. The 2-lane highway stretched ahead in a long line, bordered on both sides by endless trees. There were no houses, no towns, not even a gas station for miles. Just forest. I wasn't planning to drive this late, but delays earlier in the day forced me onto the road long past the time I usually like to stop. I told myself I'd pull over at the next rest area or small town, but nothing had come up for over an hour. My fuel gauge hovered just above a quarter tank. The forest seemed to close in more with every mile. My headlights cut a narrow path through the dark, catching the glint of road signs and the occasional reflective eyes of animals hidden in the brush. I kept glancing at the gas gauge and at the empty road ahead, feeling a growing pressure in my chest. I wasn't afraid exactly, but there's something unsettling about driving alone through such a desolate stretch with no signs of civilization. After what felt like forever, I spotted a small gravel turnout on the right side of the road. There was no sign, no lights, nothing to indicate what it was for, but it was large enough for a car. My eyes burned from staring at the road, and my head felt heavy. I decided I'd pull over, rest for maybe 20 minutes, then push on until I found a town. I eased my car onto the gravel and cut the engine. The sudden silence hit hard. No hum of the tires, no low drone of the engine, just stillness. I rolled down my window to let in some air. The night was cool, and the forest smelled damp, earthy, almost suffocating. I could hear the faint chirp of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves high up in the trees. I leaned my seat back, closed my eyes, and tried to relax. But it didn't take long before the silence began to gnaw at me. Out there, miles from anyone, every little sound felt louder, more deliberate. After about 10 minutes, I heard a noise that cut through the background, a crunch. It was sharp, distinct, the sound of a boot or heavy shoe pressing down on gravel. My eyes shot open, and I sat up quickly, my heart hammering. I stared out the windshield, but my headlights were off, and the forest ahead was pitch black. I held my breath, waiting. Another crunch. This time, it was closer, off to the left side of the car. My first thought was that it might be an animal, maybe a deer stepping on loose stone. But the sound was too heavy, too deliberate. I slowly reached out and locked the doors, my fingers trembling slightly on the button. I told myself I was imagining it, that the exhaustion was playing tricks on me. But then I heard it again, this time behind the car, closer, slow and steady, like someone circling. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I flicked on my headlights, but the beams lit up only the empty road and a thin line of trees ahead. Nothing moved. I stayed perfectly still, trying to listen, but the crickets had gone silent, as if the whole forest was holding its breath. That silence was worse than the footsteps. My chest tightened, and I gripped the steering wheel. I thought about just starting the car and leaving, but I hesitated. I didn't want to spook whatever, or whoever was out there. Minutes passed like hours. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but deep down, I knew I wasn't alone. Then I caught movement in my side mirror. Just for a second, I thought I saw a shape, a tall, dark figure at the edge of the gravel, frozen just outside the reach of my headlights. By the time I turned my head, it was gone. My mouth went dry. I fumbled for the keys, slipped them into the ignition, and turned. The engine roared to life, the sound almost deafening in the stillness. I flicked on the high beams and pressed down hard on the gas. My tires sprayed gravel as I shot back onto the highway. The forest blurred by, and I kept my eyes locked on the road ahead, afraid to look in the mirrors. For several miles, I drove faster than I should have, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles hurt. I expected to feel some relief once I was moving, but the fear only built. Every shadow on the roadside looked like a person. Every time the trees thinned and moonlight spilled through, I thought I saw a movement keeping pace with me, just out of sight. Finally, after what felt like half an hour, I spotted the glow of lights up ahead. A gas station. Relief flooded me. I pulled in fast, nearly clipping the curb. There were a few trucks parked outside and bright fluorescent lights humming overhead. I sat there for a while, engine still running, before I finally shut it off. I got out, legs shaky, and filled the tank. The presence of people, even strangers inside the convenience store, felt like a lifeline. But as I pumped gas, I couldn't stop glancing toward the dark highway I had just come from. The fear hadn't left me. It clung to me like a weight, heavy and suffocating. When I finally went inside, the harsh fluorescent lights almost blinded me. The cashier gave me a quick nod. I picked up a bottle of water, but my hands were still trembling as I carried it to the counter. My mouth felt too dry to speak, so I just paid and left. Back in the car, I sat there for a long time, staring out at the night. The gas station lights only reached so far. Beyond them was nothing but blackness and the endless forest. I thought about how close I had come to falling asleep there on the side of the road, windows open, unaware of someone or something moving around me. I don't know who or what was out there. Maybe it was just a hunter or some drifter wandering through the trees. Maybe it was nothing more than exhaustion, making me imagine shapes in the dark. but the sound of those footsteps on gravel was real. I know what I heard. That night changed how I think about being alone in remote places. I used to enjoy the quiet of the road, the freedom of driving late into the night. Now every time I pass a turnout or stop in the middle of nowhere, I remember that silence, broken only by slow, steady footsteps circling closer. I think about the shape I almost saw in the mirror, standing just outside the light, watching. I drove on that night until I found a small motel, where I locked the door and left the TV on to drown out the silence. I barely slept. Even now, when I think back on it, I can still feel the weight of that stillness pressing in, and I can still hear the crunch of gravel behind me in the dark. I never liked being out in the woods at night, but I told myself I was overthinking. I had driven out past the last bit of paved road earlier that afternoon, looking for a quiet place to camp and fish the next morning. The sun was still warm when I parked the car at the edge of a dirt track, carried my things through a narrow trail, and set up near a small clearing that opened onto a wide bend in the river. It was peaceful. The water moved slow, the grass bent with the breeze, and the only sound was the occasional thump of a fish breaking the surface. I spent a while gathering wood and stacking it beside where I planned to build a fire. By the time I finished setting up my tent and laying out my gear, the sun was low and the shadows had started stretching long. I ate a quick meal, lit the fire, and sat down with the heat at my face and the darkness pressing in from all sides. At first, it felt good. The sound of the river, the crackle of the fire, the smell of smoke. It was the kind of quiet I thought I had wanted. But when the light dropped completely, something about it all changed. The woods behind me turned black. The trees no longer looked like trees. They were just tall shapes, twisted and uneven, crowding close together. The air cooled, and the sounds changed too. Birds had stopped. Bugs kept at it, but every now and then the chorus dipped as if something had moved among them and silenced them for a moment. I told myself it was nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't the only one out there. I decided to walk a little up the riverbank with my flashlight to stretch my legs and make sure I knew my way around. The beam bounced on the ground in front of me, cutting through the dark. I swept it across the water and then back at the tree-line. The light caught pairs of faint reflections here and there, eyes from raccoons or something similar. That was normal. But once, just for a second, I thought I caught something higher up, too high for any animal I knew should be there. When I swung the light back, there was nothing. Just branches and leaves swaying in the wind. I turned around after a while, uneasy. I could see the faint orange glow of my campfire through the trees ahead, and I felt a little better. But as I walked closer, I heard something move to my left. Not a small rustle like a squirrel. It was heavy, the kind of sound something larger makes when it puts its weight on damp leaves and twigs. I froze. The fire was still maybe 50 yards ahead. I kept the flashlight pointed where I heard the sound, but all I saw was dark tree trunks stacked one behind the other. Nothing moved. I walked quicker back into the light of the fire. Once I was close enough to feel the heat on my face again, I sat down and told myself I needed to calm down. It could have been a deer. It probably was. They were everywhere out here. But the way it had sounded, slower, heavier, deliberate, didn't feel right. I added more wood to the fire and sat watching it burn. The flames bent and straightened with each push of air, spitting sparks that disappeared before they touched the ground. I stared into it for what felt like hours, not because I was relaxed, but because I didn't want to look away. If I turned my head toward the woods, I felt like I might see something I didn't want to see. When I finally lay down in the tent, I left the fire burning low outside. I zipped the flap almost all the way, but left a little gap for air. The ground was hard beneath me, and the thin fabric walls didn't block sound at all. Every noise outside felt magnified. A branch cracking, leaves shifting, the occasional plop from the river. At some point, I drifted off. I don't know how long I was asleep before I woke up again, but the fire outside had burned down to nothing more than faint embers glowing red. The woods were completely black. What woke me wasn't a noise I could place. It was more the sense that there had been a noise, and now there wasn't. The bugs that had filled the night before were gone. I sat there in my sleeping bag, breathing shallow, listening. Then I heard it. Breathing. Not mine. Something outside the tent, close. The kind of heavy exhale you hear when something big pushes air through its nose. It wasn't steady. It came, then a pause, then again, slightly farther away, then closer. I couldn't tell if it was moving past or circling. I stayed completely still. My heart thumped so hard it shook my whole chest. I thought about unzipping the tent, shining my flashlight out there, but the thought of putting myself face to face with whatever it was froze me in place. I listened as it moved again. A crunch of leaves, then another breath, this time so near I thought I could feel it through the thin nylon wall. I clenched my jaw and forced myself not to move. My throat was dry, my hands slick with sweat. Then the sound shifted, slowly fading, each exhale growing farther away. I counted in my head, reaching 20, then 30, then 50 before I dared move. I eased the zipper open just enough to see through the small gap. The fire had gone out completely. The clearing was nothing but black. I turned the flashlight on, the beam shaking in my hand. I swept it across the clearing, then into the trees. For a moment I thought I saw a shape between two trunks, taller than a man, still as stone. But then my beam passed, and when I flicked it back, it was gone. I didn't sleep again. I sat up in the tent with my light in one hand, a knife from my pack in the other. My ears strained for every sound, and the night stretched forever. By the time the first hint of pale light reached the sky, I was already packing my things. The woods looked different in the morning. Softer, calmer, harmless. The river sparkled, the birds were back, and nothing seemed wrong at all. But near the edge of the clearing, in the soft dirt where the grass thinned out, I found tracks. Not boots, not paws. They were wide and deep, pressed down in a way that showed weight. I crouched down, studying them. They looked almost human, but longer, flatter, with more space between the toes. I stood there a long time, staring at them, my stomach sinking. Whatever had been there that night had come close. Close enough to leave those marks just a few feet from where I slept. I packed up the last of my things, slung my bag over my shoulder, and didn't look back. I walked fast down the trail, every step carrying me farther from that clearing, from that river, from the tracks I couldn't explain. I told myself I'd never camp alone again, and I meant it. Even now, I can still hear that breathing when I think back. Heavy, slow, and steady, inches from me in the dark, while I lay trapped in nothing more than thin fabric, hoping it would keep moving, hoping it wouldn't decide to press closer. And I know that whatever left those tracks out there is still somewhere in those woods, moving quiet, waiting for the next person foolish enough to believe the night out there belongs to them. It started off as a regular day. I remember the air being heavy with heat, the kind of still summer air that feels like it is pressing down on your skin and seeping into your chest. I had been restless all week, stuck in the same routine, and I decided to go out on my own for a hike. I chose a trail I had been on before, but never fully explored. It was one of those places that wasn't really on any popular maps, just an overgrown path at the edge of a county road that I'd stumbled on a couple of years back. The entrance wasn't marked, and it was obvious very few people ever went down it. That was part of what pulled me in. I thought I'd finally take the time to see where it led. I parked my car on the gravel shoulder, where weeds had grown tall along the ditch. The place felt abandoned, and for some reason that made me feel more alive. I slung a small pack over my shoulder, carrying only a bottle of water, a flashlight, and a pocket knife I always carried more out of habit than necessity. It was early afternoon, and the light filtered through the trees in long golden beams, the dust and pollen floating like tiny sparks in the air. At first the trail was narrow, but clear enough to follow. Fallen branches cracked under my boots, and I could hear insects buzzing so loud it felt like a constant hum around me. The smell of damp earth and dry leaves filled the air. I walked for maybe half an hour, and the deeper I went, the more I noticed how quiet it became. The road noise disappeared. Even the insects seemed to lessen until there was only the occasional distant bird. I kept going, feeling that strange pull of wanting to see what was further ahead. The trees grew closer together, their branches twisting over the path, blocking out more of the sun. It got darker. The air cooled slightly, and I could smell the faint sour scent of something decaying nearby, maybe a dead animal hidden in the brush. I pushed the thought out of my mind and kept walking. After a while, the path began to climb. The hill was steeper than I expected, and I had to push through tangled vines and duck under low limbs. My shirt clung to me with sweat, and I could feel the damp fabric sticking to my back. The hill seemed endless, but then suddenly it leveled out. I stepped out into an opening at the top, and from there, I could see across a ridge. The view was wide, rolling hills of trees stretching in every direction. I caught my breath and stood there for a while, feeling like I had finally reached some secret point no one else ever bothered to see. But what unsettled me was the other side of the ridge. From where I stood, I saw a faint line carved into the trees. It wasn't a road, not really, more like a path of ground worn flat, cutting across the ridge and disappearing into the woods again. It didn't look natural. It looked like something, or someone, had been using it. I told myself it was probably just deer or some other animals, but the way it cut so straight across didn't sit right with me. Still, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to follow it. The path dropped sharply on the other side. The dirt was loose, and I slid a little as I went down, grabbing at roots to keep my balance. The air on this side felt different, heavier. I noticed right away how little sound there was. No birds, no buzzing, just the sound of my breathing and the crunch of my steps. As I moved further, I started to notice signs that someone had been through here. A tree trunk with old axe marks. A patch of ground pressed flat, like something heavy had been sitting there. Then a bit of rope half buried under leaves, frayed and weathered. I bent down, brushed it off, and felt an uneasiness crawl up the back of my neck. I told myself maybe hunters used this area. Maybe they dragged a blind out here or something like that. But everything about it felt off. The rope wasn't just rope. It was tied into a loop at one end like a noose. I dropped it and wiped my hand on my pants, suddenly aware of how alone I was. I should have turned around, but I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe stubbornness, maybe something deeper, like I needed to know what was really out here. I walked further, my senses on edge, every step feeling louder than it should have been. After about 10 minutes, I came across a clearing. It wasn't natural either. Someone had cut down trees and dragged them to the side. The ground was uneven, scarred with marks like things had been dug up and moved. In the center was a circle of blackened dirt where a fire had been, though it hadn't been used recently. Around it were bones, some small, some larger. Animal bones, I told myself quickly, but the way they were scattered, broken, and piled in some places made me hesitate. I felt watched. My skin prickled, and I kept glancing over my shoulder. The woods behind me looked the same as before, but it felt like the trees themselves were leaning closer, like the shadows were filling in tighter around me. I crouched down, my heart thumping, and picked up a piece of bone. It was long, thin, with the end cracked off. I held it up, trying to convince myself it was from a deer or some other animal. But as I turned it in my hand, I couldn't shake the shape of it, too much like a human arm. My stomach twisted. I dropped it. That was when I heard it. Not a voice, not words. Just the sound of breathing. Heavy, slow breathing, coming from the trees just beyond the edge of the clearing. My heart stopped for a moment. I froze, straining my ears. It wasn't the sound of an animal. It was too steady, too deep. I stared at the tree line, but I couldn't see anything. The shadows were thick, the branches too dense. But I knew something was there. The breathing shifted slightly, like whoever, or whatever it was had moved to a different angle. I backed up slowly, my hands trembling. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to stay calm, to move carefully. If I ran blindly, I could trip, break something, or worse. I stepped backward toward the slope I had come down, my eyes locked on the tree line. The breathing grew fainter, like it was moving further away. That should have calmed me, but it didn't, because the way it moved didn't sound random. It sounded deliberate, like it was circling me. That broke me. I turned and started running, crashing through branches, sliding in the dirt. My legs burned, my chest heaved, but I didn't stop. Every sound in the forest seemed louder, the snap of twigs, the scrape of leaves. I didn't dare look back. It felt like forever before I reached the ridge again. I scrambled up, my hands digging into the soil, pulling myself up the slope. When I reached the top, I paused, panting, and looked back. The clearing was hidden again by the trees, but I swore I saw movement. A shift of shadow that wasn't just wind in the branches. Something tall. Still. Watching. I didn't wait. I ran back down the path the way I had come, barely keeping track of where I was going. The trail felt endless now, every turn familiar but distorted, like I wasn't sure if I was retracing the right steps. My throat burned, my legs felt like lead, but the only thought in my head was to get out. Finally, the trees began to thin, and I saw the faint glint of sunlight reflecting off my car through the gaps. I stumbled the last few yards, nearly tripping on roots, and burst out onto the gravel shoulder. I threw myself into the car, slammed the door, and locked it. I sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, my body shaking. I could still hear my own breathing echoing in my ears, and for a moment, I thought it wasn't mine at all, but the same heavy sound I had heard in the woods. I forced myself to calm down, to focus. The forest behind me was quiet. No movement, no sign of anything. Just the trees standing tall, silent, indifferent. I started the car, the engine loud in the stillness, and pulled away without looking back. I drove faster than I should have, gravel spitting from under the tires, the road blurring past. Even after I reached town, even after I was back in my apartment with the doors locked and lights on, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The memory of that clearing, the bones, and that slow, steady breathing stuck with me. It has been weeks now, but I can't get it out of my head. I see the ridge when I close my eyes. I hear the breathing in the silence at night. Sometimes I think about the rope I found, the way the clearing looked like it had been used for something I didn't want to understand. I know one thing for certain. I wasn't alone out there. And whatever was in those woods wasn't just passing through. It was there for a reason, and it knew I was there too. It started off like any normal day, the kind of day where nothing seems out of place, and you don't expect anything unusual to happen. The air was warm, and the late afternoon sun cast a dull orange light across the sky as I drove further out of town. The further I went, the thinner the traffic became until the road narrowed into a two-lane strip winding through fields and patches of trees. I had no real reason to be there other than wanting to clear my head, to escape the noise and people for a while. I thought driving with no set destination might help. Maybe find a trail or some open space to walk and breathe without interruption. Eventually, I came across a gravel turnoff that cut away from the road, partially hidden by overgrown brush. It wasn't marked, and something about the rough path pulling into the woods made me hesitate. But curiosity outweighed caution. I slowed the car and eased onto the gravel, tires crunching as I followed it deeper into the trees. The path was uneven, riddled with dips and roots poking through, and branches reached out to scrape the sides of my car. After about half a mile, the gravel widened into what looked like a clearing, a flat patch surrounded by dense forest on all sides. I parked and killed the engine. The silence was immediate, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. I opened the door and stepped out, the ground soft with layers of old pine needles and damp earth. The air smelled faintly of moss and something faintly metallic, like rust. I locked the car and stood there for a moment, just listening. No birds, no wind moving through the leaves, just stillness. I decided to walk a bit, following what looked like a faint trail that disappeared into the undergrowth. The further I went, the less it seemed like a real trail, more like something that had been carved a long time ago and since forgotten. The ground was uneven, soft in some places, hard in others, roots coiled like traps waiting to catch my steps. The deeper I moved into the woods, the thicker the trees became, their trunks narrowing my view. I kept walking, telling myself I'd only go a little further before turning back. But something about the quiet made me want to keep going, as if there might be something just ahead worth seeing. After about 20 minutes, I reached a ridge that overlooked a shallow valley. The slope dropped steeply down, covered in fallen leaves, and at the bottom was a narrow stream cutting through the dirt. I stood at the top, catching my breath, when I noticed something that froze me in place. There were tracks in the soil near the stream, pressed deep, not from an animal but from boots. Large, heavy boots. The ground was damp enough that they were fresh, edges still sharp. I crouched down, squinting at the size of them, larger than my own by at least a few sizes. The prints didn't follow the stream. They cut straight across it and into the opposite tree line, as if whoever made them had no hesitation about moving deeper into the woods. I felt a knot in my stomach. I hadn't seen another car on that gravel turnoff. There hadn't been any sign of people. Whoever left those tracks was out here alone, just like me, but I had no idea how long ago it had been. I told myself it wasn't anything strange. Hunters, maybe, or someone camping. But the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. The prints weren't scattered the way you'd expect if someone was wandering or looking around. They were in a straight line, one after the other, purposeful. Whoever it was, they had a destination in mind. I backed away from the stream and turned to head back. The air felt heavier now, the silence thicker, as if the forest itself had leaned in closer. I walked faster, retracing my steps, but every snap of a twig beneath my shoes felt too loud. I kept glancing behind me, half expecting to see someone standing in the distance. The ridge was harder to climb back up than it had been to go down. My hands pressed into the dirt, and I could feel sweat forming on my forehead. By the time I reached the top, my breathing was fast, and that's when I heard it. A faint sound, not sharp but steady. Breathing. Slow, heavy breathing. It came from somewhere behind me, close enough that I could tell it wasn't my imagination. I froze, every muscle in my body locking in place. The sound grew louder, a deliberate inhale followed by a deep exhale, like someone trying to keep calm, but unable to hide the weight of their lungs. I didn't turn around right away. I couldn't. My mind was racing, trying to decide if I should run, stay still, or face whatever was behind me. Finally, I forced myself to look over my shoulder. Nothing. The ridge was empty, the trees still. Yet the sound was there, surrounding me, close but without a body. I scanned the tree line, searching for movement. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks, but then I noticed it, a slight shift between the trunks, like someone stepping back just far enough to stay hidden. I didn't wait any longer. I started walking, fast, back the way I came. My eyes flicked between the path ahead and the trees beside me, but the sound of breathing didn't follow. Instead, it faded into the woods, as if whoever had been there decided not to pursue. Still, I didn't slow down. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my neck. The path seemed longer than I remembered, every twist and turn stretching on. The silence returned, but it didn't calm me. It only made me feel watched. When I finally broke through the trees into the clearing where my car sat, I nearly stumbled from relief. The sight of it was the only thing keeping me from panicking. I pulled the keys from my pocket with shaking hands and unlocked the door. As I slid inside and shut it, I realized how soaked with sweat my shirt had become. I turned the ignition, the engine coughing to life. My headlights illuminated the trees ahead, and for a moment, I thought I saw something, a tall shape just beyond the reach of the light, standing unnaturally still. I blinked, and it was gone, swallowed by the darkness. I didn't wait. I shifted into reverse, backed up fast, and swung the car around until I was facing the gravel road out. My tires spun on the loose stones before finally catching, and I sped away, branches whipping against the sides as I forced my way back to the main road. Only when the pavement returned beneath my wheels did I allow myself to breathe. I didn't look back. The entire drive home, my mind replayed the sound of that breathing, the heavy presence of it, the deliberate way it seemed to follow me without ever stepping closer. I kept thinking about those boot prints by the stream, how straight and purposeful they had been. Whoever was out there wasn't wandering. They were moving with intent. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been watched the entire time I was in those woods, from the moment I stepped out of my car until I left. I thought about what might have happened if I'd followed the prints instead of turning back, or if I had hesitated longer on that ridge before running. It was clear to me then, and it still is whenever I think back to that day. I hadn't stumbled onto someone else's trail by accident. I had stumbled into someone's territory, someone who had been there long before I arrived, someone who had no reason to let me leave except for the fact that they chose not to. And that choice, knowing they could have stepped out at any moment but didn't, is the part that stays with me, heavier than anything else. Because it means that whoever was out there knew exactly where I was, exactly how close they were, and exactly when to let me go. I never went back down that road again. Even now, if I see an unmarked path breaking off into the woods, I keep driving. The memory of that breathing, slow and deliberate in the quiet of the forest, is enough to remind me that not every place is meant to be wandered into, and not every silence is empty. I remember the day starting out so calm that I never expected it would end the way it did. The air was cool when I left the house that morning, the kind of cool where the ground still held some of the night's dampness, and every step pressed the scent of wet earth into the air. I had decided to take a long walk through the woods near the edge of town, partly because I needed the space to clear my head and partly because I always liked the way those trails felt, quiet, away from everything, surrounded by nothing but trees, dirt, and the long, uneven sound of my own footsteps. The trail began just beyond a thin stretch of road where the asphalt cracked into gravel, and from there it cut into the trees like a scar. At first the forest was open enough that I could still see pieces of the sky, pale and washed out blue between the branches, But the further I walked, the more the canopy closed up. Shadows deepened, branches overlapped, and the air seemed heavier, as if the trees themselves pressed in against me. I carried only a small backpack with a bottle of water, some snacks, and a flashlight I didn't really expect to use since I thought I'd be home well before dark. My phone was in my pocket, though the signal had always been unreliable in these woods. I didn't care. I liked the silence. It made me feel like I could think without the constant pull of people and noise. For the first few hours, it was nothing unusual. I walked at a steady pace, sometimes stopping to notice things on the trail. A fallen log covered in pale green moss, the way ants crawled in lines along its surface. A bird's nest wedged into a fork of branches above me, its edges ragged but still intact. Once I saw a deer, frozen halfway across the path, its ears twitching as it stared at me before bolting into the trees with a crash of dry leaves. Everything felt normal. I wasn't even planning on walking as far as I did. The trail stretched out longer than I remembered, twisting deeper into the woods until I couldn't see any familiar markers anymore. At some point, I noticed how the ground beneath my boots had changed. The dirt path that had been packed and clear was now uneven, softer, and littered with roots that forced me to keep my eyes down. My steps made muffled thuds, and every once in a while I would hear something shift in the underbrush nearby, some small animal darting away as I approached. After about 3 hours, I realized I wasn't sure exactly where I was. I thought I had followed the main path, but somewhere along the way I must have taken a wrong turn, maybe at one of those spots where the trail split into thinner lines that all looked the same. I slowed down and looked behind me, but the way back looked no clearer than the way forward. Still, I wasn't worried. I told myself I'd just retrace my steps eventually, maybe find a landmark I recognized. It was when the sun dipped lower that the feeling started to change. The light filtering through the trees became warmer, almost orange, but instead of feeling pleasant, it gave the woods a harsher edge. Shadows grew longer, stretched thin across the uneven ground, and the air cooled in a way that raised goosebumps along my arms. I took a drink of water and kept moving, but every step seemed quieter than before, almost too quiet. Then I noticed something. I stopped for just a second, holding my breath, and I realized I could hear breathing that wasn't mine. It was faint at first, like a slow exhale, but steady. I turned quickly, scanning the trees. Nothing moved. I listened again, straining to pick out the sound, and for a moment it faded away, leaving only the rustle of leaves in the breeze. I told myself it was probably the wind, or maybe an animal, something normal. I tightened the straps on my backpack and walked faster, though, my eyes flicking to every dark gap between the trunks. The forest seemed denser now, and the path more difficult to follow. I had to step over tangled roots, push aside branches, and every time I paused I felt the weight of silence pressing down on me, broken only by the crunch of my boots. Not long after, I heard it again. This time it was closer, heavier. A deep, slow inhale, followed by a pause, then another exhale. It came from somewhere behind me. I stopped cold, the hair on the back of my neck rising. I didn't see anything, not a shape, not even movement, but I could feel it, like eyes watching me through the trees. I forced myself to keep walking, this time faster, my steps quick and uneven. The trail sloped downward into a shallow ravine, the ground softer with damp soil that clung to my boots. My breathing grew louder with the effort, but underneath it, I thought I could still hear that other rhythm, trailing me. I broke into a jog, not daring to look back anymore. The ravine narrowed, and I followed it until it opened again into a patch where the trees thinned and light broke through. My chest ached, and my throat burned from breathing too fast. I stopped there, doubled over, listening. The sound had stopped. There was nothing behind me, no movement, no breathing. I tried to convince myself that it had all been my imagination, some trick of the wind and my own panic feeding off it. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I pulled out my water bottle, took a long drink, and told myself I just needed to calm down, retrace my steps, and I'd make it back. I decided to climb a little hill just off the trail, hoping I might see something familiar. The climb was steep, and my boots slipped against loose soil, but I forced myself up, grabbing branches for balance. At the top, I looked out over the trees, but all I saw was forest stretching endlessly, rolling hills covered in green and shadows. No roads, no rooftops, no sign of where I had started. The sun was lower now, dipping toward the horizon, and the light had turned dimmer, more like dusk. My chest tightened. I didn't want to be stuck out here after dark. I scrambled back down the hill and returned to the trail, pushing myself to walk quickly. That was when I heard it again, this time clearer than before. The breathing was heavy, ragged, and it wasn't moving away. It was moving closer. My skin crawled, and I broke into a run, crashing through the undergrowth, ignoring the sting of branches whipping against my arms. I didn't care where the trail led anymore. I just wanted out. The sound followed, steady and deliberate. No snapping twigs, no clumsy noise, just that slow, labored breathing. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop. I ran until the path opened into a small clearing, and I stumbled to a halt. In the center of the clearing was an old structure, almost hidden under vines and rot. It looked like the remains of a hunting shack, half collapsed, its wooden beams dark with age. The roof sagged, and one wall had caved in, but it was shelter, a place to hide. I rushed inside, ducking beneath the broken frame. The air inside was thick with dust and damp wood. My heart hammered as I crouched low, pressing myself into a corner where the shadows were deepest. I tried to slow my breathing, to quiet the sound of it, but it was impossible. Every inhale scraped my throat, every exhale sounded too loud. Outside, the breathing grew louder. I could hear it just beyond the clearing, moving slowly around the edge. My chest tightened, so hard it felt like it might split. I stayed still, muscles cramping, every nerve straining to listen. The sound circled, then stopped. Minutes dragged by, maybe longer. My legs ached from crouching, but I didn't move. Slowly, the sound faded. The forest returned to silence. When I finally worked up the courage to move, the sky outside had darkened almost completely. I knew I couldn't stay there all night. I crawled out from the shack and forced myself back onto the trail, my flashlight in hand now. The beam cut through the dark in a narrow line, shaking with the tremor in my hand. I walked for hours, never sure if I was going in circles, the woods endless and unfamiliar. My throat was raw, my legs numb, but I kept moving, desperate not to stop. Sometimes I thought I heard something again, faint, far off, but I never saw anything. It was well past midnight when I finally saw a flicker of light ahead. At first I thought it was my imagination, but as I stumbled closer, it grew brighter. A road, a single car passing by, its headlights slicing through the dark. I broke into a sprint, crashing through the last of the trees until I spilled out onto the shoulder of the road, collapsing to my knees. The forest loomed behind me, dark and silent, and I couldn't shake the feeling that if I looked back long enough, I might see something standing just beyond the tree line. I didn't stop to look. I pushed myself to my feet, limping toward the road, and didn't look back again. Even now, I don't know what was following me. Maybe it was a person, maybe something else entirely, but it was real. I know the sound of breathing when I hear it, and it wasn't mine. It stayed with me for hours, through the fading light and the shadows, until I finally escaped. Sometimes, when the night is quiet and I walk alone, I still hear it in the back of my mind. That slow, heavy sound just out of sight. It's the kind of thing you never forget, no matter how far away you get from the woods. I remember the day clearly, though it has been a long time since it happened. It started off as nothing unusual, just another ordinary morning where the air felt thick and quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you notice every little sound. Shoes against gravel, the hum of a distant car, the rustle of wind through trees. I had decided to take a walk out past the edge of town, where the houses thinned and the roads turned into long stretches of cracked pavement bordered by fields and scattered woods. I liked being out there because it felt away from everything. I thought it would clear my head. But instead, that walk became something I'll never forget. The day was warm but not hot, and the sun was high overhead. I carried a small bottle of water, nothing else. I wasn't planning on being gone for more than an hour. The road bent left and right in slow curves, and I followed it until I reached the dirt path that cut through a strip of woods. I had walked that trail before, but only in daylight and only for a short distance. It wasn't marked well, just two worn tracks pressed into the ground by tractors or trucks from years back. I felt confident, though. I figured I'd walk the path for a while, then cut back through one of the fields and return home before the evening. The woods swallowed me quickly. Trees grew close together, the kind with thick trunks and branches that blocked out most of the sky. The dirt was packed down hard under my feet, and every step made a soft crunch from dried leaves scattered across the ground. The air smelled damp and earthy. I walked slowly at first, letting my eyes adjust to the shadows. I didn't notice right away how quiet it was compared to the road behind me. I couldn't hear any cars anymore, no dogs barking from houses in the distance. Nothing but my own footsteps and the occasional crack of a twig when I shifted my weight. I went deeper than I planned. The path seemed simple enough, and I wasn't worried about finding my way back. But then it started branching off in ways I didn't remember. One track curved left around a rise, another slanted downward between trees, and another split off almost at a right angle. They didn't look like proper trails, more like worn-down sections where people or animals had walked. I stopped for a while, trying to decide which way was the main path, but everything looked the same. I kept going anyway, telling myself I'd just turn around if it got confusing. The more I walked, the more the woods pressed in on me. The light thinned as the sun lowered, and the air cooled fast. I checked my bottle of water, only half left. That was when I first noticed the sound. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. A faint shuffle somewhere behind me. Not close, not loud, just enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck rise. I stopped walking and held my breath. Nothing moved. I told myself it was a deer, maybe a rabbit. I started again, a little faster this time. The sound came back, faint but steady, like something matching my steps a short distance behind. Every time I stopped, it stopped. When I went on, it started again. I tried to convince myself it was in my head, that the echo of my own steps was bouncing back strangely off the trees. But deep down, I knew it wasn't an echo. The trail dipped into a shallow hollow, the ground soft and uneven with roots. I walked carefully, but the noises behind me grew sharper, closer. A branch snapped. I froze again, waiting, staring back down the path. The trees were dark, their trunks packed tightly together. I didn't see anything, just shifting shadows. I stood there too long enough for my legs to tense. Then I moved on, faster, almost jogging, my water bottle clutched in one hand. I began to lose sense of direction. The paths wound and tangled. I couldn't tell if I was walking in circles or getting deeper into the woods. I looked up, hoping to see the sun, but the canopy blocked most of it. I tried to keep calm, to think clearly, but the sound of those footsteps following pulled me further into panic. I finally broke into a full run, not caring where the path led. My shoes slammed against the dirt, leaves and sticks scattering underfoot. When I stopped, I realized I was somewhere I had never been before. The path was gone. I stood in the middle of a patch of uneven ground, surrounded by trees that all looked the same. I spun slowly, searching for some sign of the way back, but nothing gave me any clue. I bent over, trying to catch my breath. My chest heaved, my throat dry. The woods were too still, too heavy. That was when I saw it. Movement between the trees about 50 feet away. Just a flicker, a dark figure shifting, then stillness. I stared hard, my eyes watering. At first, I thought it was a person, but there was no sound, no voice, nothing that gave it away clearly. Just a tall shape, half hidden by trunks, standing still as stone. I blinked, and it was gone. I told myself I was imagining it, that fear was making shadows into shapes. But deep down, I knew I had seen something real. I didn't wait. I bolted again, crashing through the underbrush, branches slapping against my arms, thorns dragging across my jeans. My water bottle slipped from my hand, but I didn't stop to grab it. I just ran, lungs burning, eyes stinging with sweat. I thought if I kept moving, I could break free of the trees, maybe find the road again. But the woods stretched on and on. The ground dipped, rose, twisted. My foot caught a root, and I stumbled hard, skinning my palms against the dirt. I lay there for a moment, gasping, listening. That was when I heard the breathing. Heavy, steady, not my own. It came from behind me, deeper in the shadows. My whole body froze. It was too human to be an animal, too close to be far away. The sound lasted only a few seconds, then faded, moving off through the trees. I pushed myself up and staggered forward. I no longer cared about the path, no longer thought about keeping calm. I just wanted out. Every sound in the woods pressed in on me. The rustle of leaves, the snap of twigs, the beat of my own pulse in my ears. My mouth was dry, my legs trembling, but I kept forcing myself forward, weaving between trees, ducking under branches. Finally, I saw a break in the trees ahead. Light spilled through, pale and wide. I stumbled toward it and burst out onto the edge of a field. The sudden openness felt unreal after the hours of tight woods. I stood there, chest heaving, staring at the wide stretch of grass. In the distance, I saw the faint line of the road. Relief hit me so hard it made my knees weak. I didn't look back. I walked across the field, each step slow and shaking, until I reached the road. Cars passed now and then, their headlights sharp against the darkening sky. I stood there until one came close, then stepped out and waved it down. When I finally made it home that night, I locked every door and window. I didn't eat, didn't sleep, just lay there with the image of that dark figure in the woods burned into my mind, and the sound of that breathing still heavy in my ears. I never went back to that trail again. Even now, I don't know what was following me. Maybe it was just some stranger wandering the woods. Maybe someone living out there, waiting, watching. Whatever it was, I knew one thing as I sat in the safety of my house. If I had stayed any longer, if I had turned down the wrong path, I might not have made it back at all. That thought has never left me, and it's why I can't walk alone in the woods anymore. Not even in daylight. Not even for a short walk. I remember that night so clearly because even now, when I think back to it, I can still feel the heaviness in my chest, the cold sweat on my back, and the way the silence around me pressed in so close that it felt like a weight. It was supposed to be just another night of being out on my own, something I had done many times before. But what happened out there left me with a kind of fear that never really went away. It's one thing to be afraid of the unknown, but it's different when you come face to face with something you can't explain in the moment. Something that feels wrong in a way your brain struggles to understand, yet still completely possible. It started when I decided to take a late drive out into the countryside. I had been restless that evening, sitting inside the house staring at my phone, not really doing anything but scrolling. The walls felt too close, and the thought of spending the whole night like that made me anxious. I grabbed my keys, told myself a drive might help clear my head, and within minutes I was on the road heading out of town. I didn't even have a real destination. I just wanted to be away from people, away from noise, away from the glow of streetlights. The roads outside of town get dark quickly. One moment you're driving past gas stations and convenience stores, and then suddenly it's nothing but fields, fences, and the occasional farmhouse set far back from the road. I rolled my window down halfway to feel the air. It was cooler than I expected, with a dampness to it, like rain might come later. The road stretched on straight for what felt like forever, the yellow lines vanishing into the blackness ahead. After about an hour, I pulled off onto a smaller gravel road I had never taken before. My headlights bounced against the trees lining either side. The sound of the gravel crunching beneath the tires echoed strangely loud in the stillness. Eventually, the road opened up into what looked like a small clearing with tall grass, and the shadow of a wooded area just beyond it. It seemed like as good a place as any to stop. I turned off the engine, and for a moment everything was swallowed by silence. That silence felt different out there. In town, silence is always layered with background noise, distant cars, voices, dogs barking. Out there, it was absolute. I could hear my own breathing, the creak of the car as it settled, even the faint ringing in my ears from being in such a quiet place. I stepped out and stretched, the gravel shifting under my shoes. I didn't plan to stay long. I thought maybe I'd just sit on the hood, look up at the stars for a while, and head back when I felt calmer. The sky above was huge, unbroken by city lights, and the stars looked so sharp it was almost unsettling. I leaned back against the car and let myself take it in. After a few minutes, though, I noticed something that pulled my eyes away from the sky. Along the edge of the tree line, on the far side of the clearing, there was movement. At first I thought it was just the breeze shifting through the grass, but then I realized it wasn't spread out like wind would make it. It was more like a figure moving, steady and straight, cutting across the ridge above the clearing. The shape wasn't close enough for me to make out details, but it was definitely a person. They were walking with a kind of deliberate pace, never pausing, never turning their head, just moving across the ridge until eventually they disappeared into the shadows on the far side. I stood there frozen for a moment, my mind trying to explain it away. Maybe it was just someone from a nearby farm, maybe checking their land. Still, the sight of someone walking alone that far out in the dark, without a flashlight, without anything, gave me an uneasy feeling I couldn't shake. I told myself it was nothing and sat back down on the hood, but I couldn't stop glancing at the ridge, half expecting to see the figure come back. They never did. After a while, I decided I'd gather a little wood from the tree line and make a small fire in the clearing. I hadn't brought much with me, but I kept a lighter in the car, and I figured sitting by a fire would feel less strange than just standing alone in the dark. I walked toward the trees, picking through fallen branches and dragging a few out with me. It was when I stepped a little deeper into the woods, maybe 10 or 15 feet past the first line of trees, that I heard it. Heavy breathing. It wasn't mine. I froze where I stood, gripping a branch in one hand like it might somehow protect me. The breathing was slow, heavy, almost labored, and it came from behind me, close enough that I felt the hair on the back of my neck rise. I turned fast, scanning between the trunks, but there was nothing clear to see. Just shifting shadows, the uneven outline of trees against the faint light spilling from the clearing. Still, I could hear it. The sound of breath moving. For a second it grew closer, and I swear I caught a flicker of movement between two trees, the kind that you don't really see but register in your peripheral vision. Then it shifted further away, like whatever it was had turned and moved deeper into the woods. The breathing grew fainter until it blended into the stillness again. My chest felt tight. I couldn't explain it, and I didn't want to. My body reacted before my mind had time to decide. I dropped the branches I had gathered and ran, crashing through the undergrowth until I burst back into the clearing. My shoes slipped on the grass, and I nearly fell before catching myself against the car. My whole body was trembling, my throat dry like I had swallowed dust. I stood there with my hands braced on the hood, forcing myself to listen. Nothing. No breathing, no footsteps, no movement. Just silence again, heavy and unbroken. I told myself I needed to leave. Whatever I had seen on the ridge, whatever I had heard in the woods, it wasn't something I was supposed to be around. I climbed back into the car, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so bad I nearly dropped them. When the engine finally turned over, the sound was so loud it almost scared me again. I backed out of the clearing too fast, tires spitting gravel, headlights jerking wildly across the grass and trees. I didn't stop until I was back on the main road, the gravel turning to pavement, the steady hum of the engine filling the cabin. Even then, I couldn't shake the feeling. The figure on the ridge, the breathing behind me, the unseen movement between the trees, it all clung to me like a shadow. I checked my mirrors constantly, half expecting to see someone following the car, but the road behind me stayed empty. By the time I reached town, my nerves were raw, every sound making me flinch. I didn't go straight home. I pulled into a gas station, sat there under the bright lights for almost half an hour, and just breathed, trying to steady myself. Being under the glow of fluorescent lamps, surrounded by the distant noise of cars on the highway, felt like being back on solid ground. When I finally drove home, I locked every door, closed every curtain, and sat in the living room with the TV on just for the noise. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that clearing, hearing the heavy breath just behind me. It's been years since that night, but I still remember it with a kind of clarity that other memories don't have. I never found out who that figure on the ridge was, or what exactly I heard in the woods. But I know it was real. It wasn't a dream, it wasn't imagination, it wasn't some ghost story. It happened, and it left me with a deep understanding of how quickly things can turn out there in the dark, how close danger can be without you even realizing it. I never went back to that clearing. I never even tried to find that gravel road again. Some things you don't chase for answers, not when the memory of them already feels too close. Even now, when I drive at night and pass by long stretches of dark fields and tree lines, I find myself watching the ridges. Part of me can't help but expect to see a figure there again, moving steadily across the darkness, not stopping, not turning, just walking until it disappears. And part of me still listens for that sound, the heavy, human breath in a place where no one should have been. I remember the night as clearly as if it happened yesterday, though it's been years. The memory sits heavy inside me, replaying in full whenever I close my eyes long enough to let my thoughts drift. It was meant to be nothing more than a simple night out in the woods, the kind of night I'd had dozens of times before, where the quiet of nature takes over and the noise of the world feels far away. I didn't expect anything strange. I didn't think twice about heading out there. But once the night unfolded, I came to understand how quickly things can turn and how fear in the woods feels unlike fear anywhere else. The day started ordinary. I had packed light, sleeping bag, a small tent, a flashlight, some food and water. I wasn't far from home, only an hour's drive, but the spot I picked was tucked into a patch of forest that rarely saw visitors. I knew the area from hiking trips, and I wanted a stretch of land that felt undisturbed, away from trails, away from the sound of cars, away from people altogether. That's why I parked my car on a dirt pull-off and carried everything in by hand, following faint animal paths until I found a clearing just wide enough for a small campfire and my tent. By the time I had the tent pitched and a little fire going, the sun was low. The air had that sharp edge it gets in late summer evenings, cool enough that you want to sit close to the flames. The forest was alive with the ordinary sounds, crickets, the occasional rustle of small animals in the brush, the far-off sound of a bird calling before settling in for the night. It all felt peaceful, the kind of peace I came looking for. I roasted a little food, ate slowly, and watched the fire collapse into glowing coals. The quiet pressed in more heavily after the fire died down. I stretched out on my sleeping bag, staring up at the sky through the gap in the trees above, watching the stars come out one by one. It must have been around 9 when I noticed movement. My eyes caught it by accident, something pale shifting along the ridge about 200 feet away. At first I thought it was just the shadow of a tree, or maybe the shifting of the light, but then I realized it was a figure. Someone was walking along the top of the ridge, steady, unhurried, the silhouette cutting across the faint light of the night sky. I froze. There was nothing around for miles, no reason anyone else should be out there. I told myself it might just be another camper, someone wandering their own stretch of woods, but the sight of that shape moving so smoothly across the ridge unsettled me in a way I couldn't explain. I expected them to stop or look down at me once I noticed them, but they didn't. They just kept walking, straight across, never pausing, and eventually disappeared over the other side of the ridge without making a sound. The silence after that felt different. I tried to shake it off, tried to convince myself it didn't mean anything, but I couldn't ignore the tension crawling through my body. I sat up straighter, listening harder to the woods, trying to hear something beyond the insects and the faint crackle of cooling embers. Nothing came. I told myself to relax. I wasn't in danger. People hike at night sometimes. There was no law against it. Still, the feeling that I had been watched stayed lodged in my chest, tightening every time I looked toward that ridge. After a while, I needed to distract myself, so I grabbed my small hatchet and decided to collect some more firewood before it got too late. The forest was darker under the canopy, my flashlight beams slicing narrow tunnels through the trees. I didn't stray far, just 50 or 60 feet from camp, looking for fallen branches. That's when I heard it breathing, heavy, labored breathing, somewhere behind me. I stopped in place, holding my breath without realizing I was doing it. The sound wasn't the quick pant of a small animal. It was deep, human-like, steady, and close enough that I knew it wasn't my imagination. I swung the flashlight around, cutting through the trunks, but there was nothing clear. Just faint movement, the suggestion of something shifting between trees. My stomach turned cold. The breathing was still there, then slowly it began to fade, as if whatever it was had moved further back into the forest. I strained my eyes, desperate to make out a shape, but it stayed hidden. That was all it took. I dropped the branches I'd gathered and ran back to camp as fast as I could. My chest ached from the sprint, but I didn't stop until I was back by the fire pit with my tent in reach. I didn't hear the breathing anymore. The woods were still again, almost too still. The hours that followed were slow and restless. I tried sitting by the fire, but every sound set me on edge. The crack of a twig, the sudden call of a night bird, the shifting of wind through leaves. My mind wouldn't let go of the figure on the ridge and the breathing behind me. I considered packing up and leaving, but the thought of walking through the woods alone in the dark was worse. I figured staying put until morning was safer, even if I didn't sleep. I stoked the fire higher, letting the flames throw as much light as they could. The glow kept the darkness back a little, but not the feeling that I wasn't alone. At some point, exhaustion must have dragged me into a shallow sleep because I woke to silence. The fire had burned down again, just faint embers. My flashlight lay by my side, still working when I clicked it on. My throat was dry, so I reached for my water bottle, and as I lifted it, I froze. In the dirt just at the edge of my camp, where the firelight barely reached, there were footprints. Not mine, not boots, bare feet. The prints circled near my tent, then cut off back toward the trees. My chest pounded so hard it hurt. Someone had been there. Someone had come close enough to stand at the edge of my camp while I slept. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, my flashlight in hand, watching every shadow twitch and stretch with the wind. No more sounds came, No more figures showed, but the thought that whoever it was could still be out there never left me. The sky began to lighten eventually, that faint gray that means dawn is close. I waited until the first real light cut through the trees before I packed up everything in a rush, not even bothering to eat. I checked the ground one last time before leaving and saw the trail of those bare footprints leading away into the woods. They weren't small. They were the kind of prints you'd expect from a grown man. I carried everything back to the car in silence, my nerves frayed raw, listening for every possible sound. When I finally saw my car through the trees, I felt relief so strong it nearly buckled my knees. I threw everything inside, climbed in, and locked the doors before even starting the engine. Only then did I let out the breath I'd been holding all morning. Driving away, I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see someone step out of the trees, watching me go. But no one did. The road was empty, the woods quiet behind me. Still, the memory stayed sharp. The figure on the ridge, the breathing in the trees, the footprints circling my camp. It was all real. No tricks, no imagination. Just the raw fact that I had not been alone out there, and whoever was near me had wanted me to know it without ever showing their face. That night taught me something I've never forgotten. The woods aren't empty, no matter how quiet they seem. There are places where people go not to be found, and sometimes you cross paths without meaning to. Since then, I've never camped alone again. I still love the outdoors, still hike and fish and sit under the stars, but I never let myself forget that night, and the way it felt to know someone had been standing so close while I slept. It was real, it was human, and it was enough to make me understand that the scariest thing in the woods is never the dark. It's whoever else might be standing in it, just far enough away that you can't see them. I remember the feeling of cold sweat sticking to my back, even though the air outside was warm that evening. The sky was clear, the kind of summer evening that feels harmless, almost comforting, with the last bit of sunlight fading behind the trees. I had decided to take a walk, something I did often when my head felt crowded. The road near my house cut through open fields and patches of woodland, quiet enough that you could hear crickets buzzing before night even settled in. I didn't think much about the fact that I was going alone, or that the daylight was slipping away quicker than I expected. I started along the road with my hands in my pockets, noticing the way the tall grass leaned into the wind and the smell of dry dirt rising from the ground. Every now and then a car would pass, but as I went further out, the traffic thinned until it was just me and the fading orange glow in the sky. I had gone this way plenty of times, so I wasn't uneasy yet, just wrapped in the rhythm of my footsteps and the thought of how far I'd go before turning back. By the time I reached the old split in the road, the sun was already slipping below the tree-line. The left path led back toward the main road, the one I usually took when I wanted to stay in familiar territory. The right path narrowed into gravel, leading deeper into the woods. I don't know what made me turn right. Maybe I was restless. Maybe I thought I'd cut through and come out near the other side faster. At the time, it felt like a harmless choice. The gravel crunched under my shoes, louder than I expected in the still air. The trees pressed in quickly on both sides, tall trunks crowding close together with their branches blocking out the last scraps of daylight. Within minutes the orange glow was gone, replaced by that heavy, dull shade that comes just before true dark. I kept walking, trying to memorize the bends in the path. I had no flashlight with me, only the weak glow of my phone if I needed it, but I told myself I wouldn't. It was supposed to be just a walk. I noticed the air grew cooler as I went further, and the sound of insects wasn't as strong in the deeper woods. The silence pressed closer, broken only by the crunch of my steps. Then I heard something else. It wasn't loud at first, just faint enough to make me stop and hold my breath. Leaves shifting, branches snapping, not the sound of a squirrel or a rabbit. Heavier. I stood still for a long moment, staring into the dark between the trees. Nothing moved, nothing showed itself. So I told myself it was just the woods adjusting to the night, maybe a deer moving somewhere off the trail. I kept walking, but my steps were slower, more careful now. My ears strained for every sound. The path bent left and narrowed even more. The trees looked thicker here, leaning toward each other, as though trying to cover the road completely. My stomach tightened when I realized how quickly the light had gone. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. Past 9. The screen lit up my face for a second, harsh and artificial against the dark, before I shut it off and slipped it back in my pocket. That's when I heard it again, only closer. Heavy steps, the crunch of leaves pressed down by weight. This time I froze, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. I turned slowly, staring down the path behind me. It was empty, but the sound had been clear, not my imagination. The silence afterward was worse, as if the woods were holding their breath too. I forced myself to keep moving. My walk had turned into something else now, no longer peaceful, no longer meant to clear my head. Every step felt like it echoed. My throat was dry, my palms sweaty. I kept glancing over my shoulder, catching nothing but the black shapes of trees melting into each other. My mind wanted to race ahead with thoughts I tried to push down. I didn't want to believe anyone was back there, following me. I didn't want to think about what else it could be. The path sloped downward into a dip where the air felt damper, colder. That's where I smelled it. Something sharp, almost metallic, like rust or blood carried faintly on the breeze. I stopped again, sucking the air through my teeth, straining to place it. It was faint, but it didn't belong. I didn't want to linger long enough to figure out where it came from. When I started forward again, I heard it without question this time. Footsteps, steady and deliberate, behind me. I turned fast, phone in hand, screen lighting up a weak circle. Nothing. Just the trees, their bark peeling and pale in the glow. The sound stopped the moment I stopped. I stood there shaking, arm raised, waiting to see movement in the shadows. I spun back and walked faster, almost a jog now, gravel scattering under my feet. My breath was quick, shallow, and loud in my ears. The trees pressed tighter, the air thicker. Every time I picked up speed, I swore I heard the same rhythm following, matching, just out of sight. Not running, not stumbling, steady, as though whoever or whatever it was didn't need to rush. At one point the path forked again, but I didn't remember it from before. Both directions looked the same, dark, narrow, endless. My chest tightened with panic. I stood there for too long, trying to decide, when I heard it again, closer this time. I took the left without thinking, feet pounding on the gravel. The left trail felt less like a road and more like a game trail, weaving tighter between trees. Branches scraped my arms and caught on my shirt. My legs burned as I forced myself to keep going, not daring to look back now. I could hear it still, faint but certain, something moving behind me at the same speed I moved. Always matching, never retreating. I started to notice landmarks now, desperate for something familiar. A fallen log, half rotted and split open. A rock jutting out of the ground. None of it helped me know where I was. The woods seemed endless, twisting on themselves. My lungs hurt, my throat raw. I slowed, stumbling, when I noticed something ahead, an opening. The trees thinned suddenly, and I stepped out into a clearing. The ground leveled into short grass, the moon just high enough to cast pale light across the space. Relief hit me for only a second before the silence of the clearing felt worse than the woods. I stopped in the center, bent over, hands on my knees, gasping for breath. My ears strained. Nothing. The footsteps were gone. I stayed like that, staring at the tree line, waiting for something to move, waiting for a shadow to break off and come toward me. My heart hammered so hard I thought I would pass out. The longer I stood there, the more I felt watched. Not from one place, but from every direction. I could feel it pressing in, thick and heavy. I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to pick a side of the clearing and hope it led me out. My body felt like it moved on its own, stumbling forward, eyes scanning for any sign of a road, a light, anything. That's when I saw it. Off to the right, half hidden by trees, a shape that looked like a fence post. I moved toward it, then saw the faint outline of wire strung between posts. My chest loosened a little. A fence meant property. Property meant people. I followed the fence line, brushing against rough wire, ignoring the way it scratched my arm. After what felt like forever, I saw a break, an old wooden gate, half hanging, crooked on its hinges. I slipped through, the sound of it creaking behind me making my skin crawl. On the other side was another path, this one wider, packed dirt with tire tracks pressed into it. I followed it as fast as my legs could carry me. My legs ached, my knees weak, but I didn't stop. My head whipped around at every sound, every shift of leaves, but the woods behind me stayed silent. It wasn't until I saw the glow of a porch light in the distance that I finally let myself breathe. A small farmhouse sat up on a rise, its light cutting across the road. I don't remember crossing the last stretch, only the way the gravel cut into my shoes as I nearly ran to reach it. The sound of a dog barking from somewhere in the yard was the first normal thing I had heard in what felt like hours. I stopped under the porch light, bent over, hands trembling, sweat dripping down my face. I didn't knock, didn't go to the door. I just stood there in the light, refusing to step back into the dark. My chest rose and fell, air burning in my lungs. For the first time all night, the silence didn't feel like it was pressing in. It felt like safety. I never found out what was in those woods. I never figured out if someone was following me or if my fear had twisted sounds into something else. All I knew was the steady rhythm of those footsteps, always matching mine, always close but never seen. Even now, years later, I can still hear that sound in my head, the way it stopped every time I stopped, the way it returned when I moved again. That night I walked home along the main road under the pale glow of the porch light until I saw the distant glow of street lamps, refusing to let the dark swallow me again. I never took that right-hand path again. Even now, I never walk without a flashlight, and I never ignore the feeling of being followed. Because the silence of the woods isn't empty. It remembers and it waits. And if you're not careful, it follows. I never liked driving late at night, but sometimes I didn't have a choice. That night I had been working late and didn't leave until after midnight. The road home stretched for miles through empty farmland, the kind of place where there are no streetlights, no other cars, nothing but the thin white lines of the pavement and the shadows of trees reaching across from both sides. The night felt heavier than usual, darker than usual, and the silence inside my car seemed to grow louder the further I drove. I could hear every small noise, from the soft hum of the tires to the ticking sound when I touched the indicator, and it felt like even the smallest sound echoed in that endless space. The road was so quiet that I started noticing every detail more than I usually did. The dashboard lights glowed faintly, throwing a pale green on my hands gripping the wheel. My headlights stretched ahead, cutting a narrow path into the dark, but everything outside that beam was pure black. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, and every time it was just as empty as before. Still, I found myself checking it again and again, almost expecting something to show up behind me. The only other lights came from the red glow of my taillights, bouncing faintly against the road behind me whenever I looked back. I had about an hour of driving left, and already my body was feeling heavy from exhaustion. My eyes burned a little, and I had to blink often to keep them sharp. I rolled the window down for a moment to let the cold air hit me, and it worked for a while. The smell of fields and damp dirt drifted into the car, reminding me how far I was from anything. No houses, no gas stations, no sign of life at all, just miles of empty road and black fields. About halfway through the drive, I saw something up ahead on the road. At first it looked like nothing, just a shape lying in the center of the lane. But as I got closer, I realized it was an animal. A deer, stretched out on its side, completely still. I slowed down and moved around it, the beam of my headlights brushing over its lifeless body for just a moment. Its eyes reflected the light, bright and glassy, and then were gone as I passed. I felt a chill creep into me, even though I knew deer often got hit by cars around these roads. Still, there was something unsettling about how still it was, how it seemed to have been left there in the middle of nowhere, like no one would ever come for it. I tried to shake it off and kept driving, but a strange feeling stuck with me. The road seemed emptier than before, and I couldn't help but keep glancing at the mirrors again. My ears picked up every sound in the car. The hum of the tires almost seemed to grow louder, vibrating through the floor. My fingers were tight on the steering wheel without me realizing it. I told myself it was just the tiredness making me uneasy, but that didn't help much. A few miles later, I thought I saw movement at the edge of my headlights. Something darted across the road too quickly for me to get a clear look. My foot slammed on the brakes without me even thinking. The car skidded slightly before coming to a stop. I sat there breathing hard, staring out at the empty road ahead. Nothing was there. I leaned forward, squinting into the dark, but the road was clear. My heart was hammering in my chest, and I sat there for what felt like a full minute before finally pressing the gas again. The car crawled forward slowly until I felt safe enough to push it back up to speed. The longer I drove, the stranger it felt. The night wasn't just quiet anymore. It was oppressively silent, like everything around me was holding its breath. I couldn't even see stars overhead, just thick clouds covering the sky. The beam of my headlights seemed smaller, as though the darkness was swallowing them up. Every part of me wanted to reach the end of that road as fast as I could, but it also felt like no matter how far I went, The road was stretching longer than it should. I tried to distract myself by focusing on the small details inside the car. The faint scratches on the steering wheel, the way the fabric of the seat pressed against my legs, the slow rise and fall of the fuel gauge needle. But each time my eyes drifted back to the road, the unease hit me all over again. My body was tense, shoulders tight, jaw clenched, and the air inside the car felt warmer than it should, even though the window was cracked open. Then I noticed something strange. When I looked into the rearview mirror, for just a split second, I thought I saw headlights in the distance behind me. 2 small dots of light, faint but there. Relief washed over me for a moment. I wasn't alone on the road. But when I looked again, the lights were gone. The road was just as black and empty as before. I kept glancing back every few seconds, convinced I would see them again, but there was nothing. I told myself maybe it had been my eyes playing tricks or a reflection from something, but the unease deepened. My body wouldn't relax no matter how much I tried. Minutes passed like hours. Every bend in the road felt the same. Every tree at the edge of the headlights looked identical. It started to feel like I wasn't getting any closer to home at all, just stuck in an endless loop of the same stretch of road. My grip on the wheel tightened even more, and I had to keep rolling my shoulders to shake out the stiffness. My breath sounded loud in the small space of the car, and the back of my neck prickled as if I was being watched. I tried not to look in the mirrors anymore, but my eyes kept drifting there on their own. That same black nothing stared back at me every time. My brain started to fill in shapes that weren't there. For a second I thought I saw a shadow move in the back seat reflection, but when I twisted around, the seats were empty. My stomach dropped all the same, and I forced myself to keep my eyes forward, not trusting the mirror anymore. The miles dragged on until finally I saw something up ahead that broke the monotony. A car pulled off to the side of the road with its hazard lights blinking. Relief hit me at first, proof that I wasn't alone, but it quickly turned into hesitation. The car looked out of place. It was angled oddly, not parked properly, almost as if it had been abandoned in a hurry. The blinking orange lights threw a strange glow on the ground around it, and as I slowed down I saw that the driver's door was wide open. No one was inside, no movement around it at all. I passed it slowly, my eyes straining to catch every detail. The car looked fairly new, clean, but something about it felt wrong. The hazard lights kept flashing rhythmically, and the open door gaped like a mouth. The fields around it were empty, but I couldn't shake the thought that someone was hiding just out of sight, waiting. My foot pressed harder on the gas as I passed, and I didn't look back in the mirror. I didn't want to see if something was there. The last stretch of the drive felt like a blur of fear and exhaustion mixing together. My heart never fully slowed down, and every little sound made me jump. The deer, the strange flash of headlights, the abandoned car, they all piled up in my head until I felt like I was being herded forward by something unseen, pushed faster and faster down that endless strip of asphalt. When I finally reached the first faint glow of lights from the outskirts of town, the relief hit me so hard I almost laughed. The sight of a gas station sign in the distance felt unreal after all those miles of darkness. As I pulled into town, the road slowly came alive with streetlights and the occasional car. The world felt normal again, noise and light and people around me. I could breathe easier, but my body stayed tense, and the back of my mind wouldn't let go of the night behind me. Even when I pulled into my driveway and shut off the car, the silence felt heavy again. The house was dark and quiet, but at least it was home. I carried myself inside quickly, locked the door, and stood there in the hallway for a long time listening. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of a clock on the wall, the creak of the floor beneath my feet, it all grounded me, but it didn't erase the road behind me. That long, empty stretch of blacktop, the lifeless deer, the flicker of headlights that weren't there, the car with its door open in the middle of nowhere. I knew I'd have to drive it again someday, but the thought of that road stayed with me long after the night ended, pressing on me whenever I remembered just how alone I had really been out there.